Hey everyone, I just finished recording this video, and as you can see, it's extremely long. So I thought I should provide you with a little bit of preface, to establish a setting here. This is a response to someone called the Distributist, who did a response video to one of my videos called "The Theft of Our Values." It's on my Dark Matter 2525 channel, and it's responding to David Wood in his debate with Michael Shermer about how we have Christianity to thank for modern science. And I have to go through the history, and I make a lot of points in 40 minutes of video. So the nature of the beast is that, since he's pausing my video every dozen or so seconds to interject, the nature of the beast is that his video is, over 2 hours long. And I want to respond to him because he very much so misrepresents me. And he puts a lot of straw men out there in the world that, thousands of people have seen and believed, directly, a direct contradiction of the things that I actually do believe, a total misrepresentation. So I want to put this response out there in the world, just so that it exists. I mean, even if people don't watch it, I don't expect people to sit through all this, but even just the fact that it exists, to get it off my chest is enough. I've watched extremely long videos like this, but I usually do it while I'm doing other things. I listen in my car or while I'm cleaning a house or something like that. So maybe if this interests you, you could do that as well. But without further ado, let's get into what I recorded. He did his response in a live stream, totally unscripted, just responding however he saw fit. And that's essentially what I'm doing now. I didn't script any of this. I just responded off the cuff, which is not my forte. I am not good off the cuff. I usually script everything out. So this is extremely rough, and I apologize for that. But I guess you get to see more of, how I really am, without, thinking about something extensively. This is me responding to something off the cuff. So you get to see that side of me. I do get upset from time to time, and I think that's okay. There's a lot of people nowadays who have the mentality of this person that I'm responding to that, it's a gotcha if you're salty. That's the word they use now, salty. You're salty. Back, 10 years ago, they used to say, you mad, brah? You mad, brah? That was the big gotcha. The objective was to get the person mad. That means you won. Well, I hate to break it to you, but no, that doesn't mean that you won. There are some things you should be mad about. There are some things where it's okay to be angry. And I have no problem with expressing that emotion. And I have no delusions that I have lost anything by expressing my anger. Okay? So we can dispense with that bit of juvenile bullshit right now. And I should warn you, yes, I do swear. I'm sorry, that was a little bit late to warn you, but yeah, I do swear intermittently in this video. So bear that in mind as well. Okay, without further ado, let's get into this response in 3, 2, 1.
You'll tell me if there's you can't hear this, right?
The Christian legacy in America has historically manifested in attempts to usurp the very freedoms of which they ironically claim credit. Freedoms that didn't exist throughout the vast majority of Christian history. That's especially disconcerting during this day and age, when people seem to think that the answer to Islam is Christianity.
I mean, I'm just gonna pause it here. We're already in a pretty weird space, right? We're talking about freedom. It didn't exist during the vast, the longest time during.
No, this is already a straw man. I didn't say freedom didn't exist. Freedoms. There are specific freedoms to which I'm referring and to which I elucidate further in the video. I'm talking about things like freedom of speech and press and assembly and the right to bear arms and, illegal searches and seizures. I'm talking about the Bill of Rights, basically. Obviously, these freedoms, these restrictions against government power weren't the norm throughout Christendom, obviously. Do you think that people were free to speak their minds? Do you think people were free to practice whatever religion they wanted to practice? Do you think people could be armed whenever they want and assemble whenever they want and write whatever they want about and speak truth to power? Do you think that they could say, no, you can't illegally search and seize my property? No, I'm not saying that freedom didn't exist. I'm being very specific.
In Christendom, right? Okay, it didn't exist in the thousands of years before Christendom. This is sort of the. I got a little bit of this in my conversation on, was it Westward Thought Stream? It's this idea that you can kind of like ahistorically superimpose our standards back onto Christianity, but not superimpose them back onto other ideologies that.
This is a Christian having his cake and eating it too. What you're seeing here is a Christian who is engaging in moral relativism. He's not going to call it that, but that's essentially what he's doing. He's applying different standards of morality and saying, he's using this as a refutation of me. Like, I'm the one who is applying my standards of morality. How dare I have a standard of morality? And then this is the same type of person who's going to turn around and accuse me of not having a standard of morality. He's saying that also that I would apply my standard to Christianity, but, not to other ideologies. That's just not true, though. Like in the video itself, I talk about pre-Christian cultures. I talk about ancient Greece. I talk about their slavery. I talk about their persecution of atheists, right? I don't give preferential treatment. Even before this, even before he said this, I was clearly not an advocate of Islam, right? I'm not just picking on Christianity here, but because this is a response to a Christian and he was boasting about, Christianity and he was giving credit for Christianity to Christianity for things that I don't think it should have credit for. This video is naturally going to be about that. That's the context.
That atheists typically want to draw from. I've never met an atheist who didn't say draw from concepts like Epicureanism and older philosophies like Pythagoras or the early pre-Socratics, but at the same time they didn't have a concept of freedom like we do right now. These are modern concepts that we're just sort of back casting into onto Christendom and then saying, oh, look, they didn't do it. So we're already kind of in a weird place, but I'll keep.
What this guy is failing to do is recognize the reason for the so-called backcasting. It's because I'm responding to a claim. I'm responding to people who make claims like, that we have Christianity to thank for these freedoms. And I'm saying, well, look at Christian history. From where did these freedoms come? And why are so many Christians nowadays trying to usurp these very same freedoms that they said that they created in the first place? There's an actual reason that I'm doing this. I'm not just doing this from a position of arrogance and saying that, look at us. Look at how much better we are than those backwards Christians. That's simplistic. That's too simplistic. Pay attention to the fact that I'm responding to a claim.
And Islam have shared some disturbing similarities, both being ancient Middle Eastern Abrahamic religions with long histories of authoritarianism, censorship, and brutality. While their DNA is identical, the main reason Christianity manifests differently today is because it has been declawed by a few hundred years of secularism. This should tell us that the answer to Islam is not more religion, but less. Too many people.
Okay. So here we sort of get the main thesis that dark matter has, right? So he wants to sort of, and I've seen this from Christopher Hitchens as well. Uh, Islam and Christianity are the same thing. The civilizations developed in similar ways, and therefore, we have to make sure that Christianity goes away entirely, because if we get rid of Christianity entirely, this is going to encourage some kind of sympathetic response in the Middle East where they're going to secularize Islam. But, although his understanding of history is totally ahistorical, and superimposes a modern standard, he doesn't seem to actually go to primary historical sources and ask if people thought the same way in Muslim societies as they did in Christian ones, right? If you went back to the 17th century and looked at Italian society and Turkish society, would it be very different?
Okay, so this is just him inserting an argument that I never made. My argument was that we should not use Christianity to combat Islam. That all of a sudden Muslims are going to, they're going to see the defeat of Christianity and then, secularize themselves. I never even implied anything like that. That's ridiculous. I think that we should fight Christianity, and and when I say that, I don't mean in a violent sort of way. I'm talking about through rhetoric and ridicule and scholarship, and I think we should do the same against Islam. Islam should not receive any sort of preferential treatment. Both Christianity and Islam should be resisted. Furthermore, any religion that makes false claims and influences society in negative ways and makes impositions should be resisted. That is my assertion. Not any of this crap that this guy is about to impose upon my statements. This is all coming straight out of his head. This is the beginning of his straw man, I can see already.
Well, actually, it would be. If you read people like Machiavelli, and Machiavelli isn't even that negative to the Turks, but he very clearly lays out differences in how Islamic societies run. And in particular, he talks about how much more controlling and authoritarian they are. And he references it as a positive. So, this idea that, again, it's sort of this Hegelian notion of history. Progressives have essentially sanitized a look back on history, and they sort of, you can see how this is being sort of fit into a progressive narrative. So,
of course, here we go with the dreaded conspiratorial narrative. I can't possibly have an opinion of my own. How dare I take umbrage with people giving credit to an ideology, a time and a place, and an ideology that would have had me killed for saying a modicum of the shit I say today. That can't be it. No, it has to be some conspiratorial narrative.
I'll go on a little bit further.
People mistakenly believe that religion stabilizes society. In fact, it has been our Christian leaders in the West who talk tough on terrorism, only to then prop up and arm Islamic theocratic regimes in the Middle East and Asia, which have destabilized their regions, thereby causing refugees and migrants to flee their highly religious countries into the stability and safety of secular countries.
Remember, kids, it's Christianity that's responsible for American foreign policy. But when, the Islamic immigrants are coming into those countries, they become secular countries, right? So, you see, when we have...
Yes, there's a very big difference between the leaders of a country and their religion and the way their religion influences them, and the actual doctrine upon which a country is based. And the doctrine upon which our country, upon which the United States is based, is wholly secular. The politicians, however, are oftentimes, well, most of the time, they're not secular, they're Christian. George Bush was a Christian. He said he went to war with Iraq because, God told him that that's what he wanted him to do. So yes, there is a separation there. There can be both going on at the same time. These are not mutually exclusive ideas. Yes.
In foreign policy, it becomes Christian. When we have those societies themselves, the same ones that implemented the foreign policy, become victims of immigration wave, they suddenly become victims and therefore are secular, right?
Yes, that's right. There are people who make decisions. The politicians who make decisions are often Christians and are often motivated by their Christianity, or at least they say they are, to gain influence among the populace, using religion to manipulate. And then there's the actual doctrine that the country is based upon, that the country is organized around, which is secular. And of course, a lot of these countries are becoming increasingly secular. Their secular populations are growing and could be described as secular in those terms as well. In that case, you can still have both at the same time. You can have religious leaders making the decisions, and you can have a largely secular populace, which is different from the leaders, and you could still describe it as a secular country based on its secular majority. So yes, once again, these things are not mutually exclusive.
We will never solve this problem if we keep giving the problem credit for being the solution. Religion is not the answer. That is why I feel I must set the record straight when a recent wave of populist voices have been duped into presenting Christianity as the solution to geopolitical and social problems, because they think it's the foundation of our culture, and that even atheists like myself are cultural Christians.
I mean, this is kind of an interesting question. I mean, I'm actually glad I'm reviewing this now. Hopefully I do a good job, considering I'm just doing it off the cuff first time. It does sort of get to the heart of my contention, right? So Dark Matter 25 must see that there's a problem. And I'm looking at these images and how he references immigration into secular societies, and he kind of sneers when he says that. He obviously understands that there is some kind of problem. Okay, so he doesn't think Christianity is the solution. What's the solution?
I'll tell you right now, I don't provide a solution in my video. That's not what the video was for. Yeah, I know there's a problem. I would probably frame it very differently than the alt-right would. But in order to recognize a problem, one need not also provide a solution. You can recognize a problem without knowing the solution to that problem, okay? And I do think it's sort of telling that you're expecting a solution to come from me. Obviously, you can know that an answer is wrong without knowing the right answer. You don't need to know the right answer in order to be able to recognize a wrong answer. You get that? Don't look for a solution from me. I don't have it. I would add, however, that part of finding the solution is being able to recognize what would not be a solution and what would, in fact, exacerbate the problem.
I'm maybe he'll propose one. Again, I haven't seen this. I'm watching this off the cuff, but it's not clear to me. I mean, if you're wondering why, at the height of its economic and military power, Europe essentially just decided to commit cultural suicide. The first question you're going to be asking yourself is, why hasn't this happened any time in the past for Europe? No European society would have ever done what Angela Merkel did. So you have to answer me that, if religion is the problem, right? Why did Christian Germany not do what Angela Merkel did to her own country and to Europe in general? Why are all these problems manifesting themselves right now? Because the hostility of Islam to the West, it's not a new thing. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he'll say something about this, but it's ahistorical to present hostility of Islam towards the West as being a product of American foreign policy. And American foreign policy apparently being the product of Christian pastors. So Who knows?
Okay, so this is extremely wrong. Obviously, I'm not talking about American Christian pastors. And I think he knows that because he's referring to foreign policy. Obviously, I'm talking about Congress and the President of the United States. And of course, he also gets it wrong on the foreign policy end of it. He's thinking I'm making the old argument that dropping our bombs on the Middle East is what's creating terrorism. That's what he thinks my argument is, but it's actually the inverse of that. It's before that. It's when we were giving weapons and money and funding Islamic fundamentalism. And why were we doing this? There was a definite religious motive behind that. We were combating the communists, the godless commies, right? It's about the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That was our policy, and it came back and bit us in the ass. And I'm criticizing that, right? I'm saying that religion played a role in this. And this guy, that just whoosh right over this guy's head. And he takes this straw man. He's beating a straw man, dark matter 2525 right now. Very frustrating. Listen to the actual words that I say and respond to those. I would very much appreciate it.
Let's just play it.
I say it's the exact opposite. Christians are typically cultural secularists, all the way to the point that even their most sacred holy days are now homages to capitalism. And that's fine by this old atheist, but that leaves Jesus with far too many tables to overturn. So let's not overstate Christianity's true role in this ever-changing world of ours.
Cultural secularists. I mean, now this is kind of the fundamental contradiction, because I am positive that if I got Dark Matter 2525 onto one of my streams and I actually pressed him on his beliefs, he'd be going to the lack of belief thing in 5 seconds. In 5 seconds, he'd be claiming that atheism is nothing. It's just a lack of belief. He doesn't believe anything. He has no positive beliefs. He's just a skeptic. Come on, what are you doing? Why are you hassling me? I don't have any beliefs. I'm just the default, right? But now all of a sudden, we're...
No, my goodness, no. You obviously don't know anything about me. I hear claims about God. I hear positive claims about God, and I say, no, I don't believe that. It's more than just a lack of belief in a God. I think that would be true for like a baby or an animal or something like that. But no, I heard the claim. I've heard the claim. I've examined the claim. Okay, I have stacks of books of apologetics and Bibles in my house that I've read. I've studied the claims and I reject them. It's more than just a lack of belief. It's a disbelief. And what's more than that is there's agnosticism too. I realize that I can't make any knowledge claims about some kind of unknown deity. I don't know if there's a deity. But I will go so far as to make the positive claim that the specific God, Yahweh, does not exist. So no, there's definitely more than a lack of belief there. There's no Yahweh. I don't know if there's some other kind of deity, but I strongly doubt it. I have disbelief in that regard. So no, stop making these assumptions about me. I would greatly appreciate that. Just deal with the things that I actually say. You will notice that in my refutation to your refutation, that I am not making any kind of assumptions about your character, about who you are at all, about what you have experienced in life, about any arguments you might make if we talked in person. I don't know. I just honestly go off of the things that come out of your mouth. And I would appreciate it if you would do me that same courtesy.
Hearing about how Christianity is co-opting cultural secularism. What's secularism? It can't just be a lack of something, because you can't co-opt a lack of something. So it's got to be something. Is it capitalism? Is he just going to own capitalism? Is this just going to be is dark matter 25's philosophy just capitalism, the ideology, capitalism, the way of life? I really doubt it, right? I think he wants to make I don't know. Maybe he means that cultural secularism is just modernity. It's just consumption writ large, and I can kind of see that. I think that in that case, he really owns a lot of the problems of modernity if he's going to just say that secularism just means modernity. But again, this contradiction. I also noticed the title of this video, The Theft of Our Values. I mean, who is our in this case? Apparently it's the group of atheists or secularists. I mean, again, there goes my lack of belief, guys.
Our values. By our, I did not mean just atheists. I meant people of Western, what is typically called Western civilization. A lot of the values that Christians hold, which they believe to come from Christianity, I'm claiming are stolen. They don't actually come from Christianity. That's my claim.
Right? He's definitely talking about a positive cultural group. But again, what's unifying this group? A lack of something? Well, a lack of something can't have values. A lack of something can't be co-opted. He's talking about a very particular group, a very particular set of people, a very particular set of ideas. Will we see what this actually means? Will we get hints of what he actually means when he talks about secularism as a positive force, or when he talks about our values with a capital?
No, I'm not just talking about my little group, and I'll have you know that I am more than my atheism, okay? There's more to me than just my atheism. I belong to all kinds of demographics, and you're not going to just whittle me down to atheist so that you can answer all of my beliefs and in that particular way, so that you can claim that I am just the absence of something. No, there's all kinds of things about me that are positive, that are claims, that are actual positive assertions. Okay, just because I'm an atheist, that doesn't mean that I don't make any claims. That should be obvious.
Oh, I doubt it, but I'm just going to press forward.
To frame my point, I'm going to respond to David Wood's defibrillator argument for God. The reason I chose David is because his approach exemplifies what Christianity has done throughout history. From the current idea of what we call Western values to science itself, Christianity loves to take all the credit. But when you delve into the actual history, you find that at best, Christianity played only a part, and at worst, it was active opposition.
Now, this is always the thing, right? I mean, I don't doubt that this guy is going to give all the credit to any other ideology that's reigning during these technological achievements. For instance, I mean, whenever we see a huge explosion of culture and production and science, it's very often that we attribute these results to the culture at large, right? I mean, I think most people would consider the invention of most of the Chinese things that we like, noodles and fireworks and gunpowder. These would all be attributed to Chinese culture. Are they actually the result of abstract Chinese culture? Well, I mean, to a certain extent they are. But to say that they aren't is just to say that culture itself has it doesn't have any responsibility for the individual scientific achievements. I mean, it also sort of begs a question, and maybe we'll see an answer to this, is why did it occur in Europe, right? If Christianity is such a malfeasant force, why did this explosion of science and culture occur only in Europe and nowhere else in Buddhist countries, nowhere else in Islamic countries, nowhere else in African countries? Some of these countries even had these very rarefied atheistic.
So he's sort of making an argument before even listening to my argument, and of course, my answer to these was that the groundwork was laid, long before Christianity, at least a couple hundred years before Christianity began, and that it was delayed. My argument is that it should have happened much earlier. It should have been quicker. Should have been sooner. But that it was delayed because of Christianity. So why did it happen there? It should have happened there much sooner. That's the argument. But I don't know if he'll perceive that as my argument. He seems to cling to these straw men. We'll see what happens.
Kind of philosophies. I mean, if you consider lack of a deity to be your thing, why didn't the scientific revolution occur in Tibet?
Oh, wow. Okay, I did not realize that he misunderstood so far to this much of a degree. I'm not saying that atheism would have caused the rise of this, the scientific revolution. No. As you'll see in my video, I give credit to the Greeks and later to the Romans to a lesser degree, but these are also cultures which shunned atheism. These are also cultures probably would have killed somebody like me. I'm not giving credit to atheists. I am trying to put credit where credit is due, regardless of whether they would have killed me or not. I am trying to say, hey, stop placing all the credit in Christianity's hands, because it doesn't belong there. I'm saying Christianity was more of an obstacle than a catalyst.
Oh, gotta hit that again.
In this case, David gives Christianity the credit for science, decrying what he calls atheist teenagers on Twitter who think they're champions of science. I think that's posturing, however, because I suspect David would not trouble himself with such a response to mere teenagers on Twitter. The more
I have no idea what he's talking about here, so I'm just going to let it go by.
No, that's obvious. You haven't had any idea of what I've been talking about since you started this video. Obviously, it's a response video, not to you, but to somebody else who was making a whole set of claims of their own. And perhaps it would behoove you to educate yourself about what that person said. I say who they are. I say, I leave links in the description of my video where you can find what I'm responding to. Maybe you should have done that. Maybe the context would have given you some a better understanding of what's going on here. But no, you're just going to plow on in ignorance, I see. So, okay, let's plow on in ignorance, shall we?
Probable reason for his argument, I believe, is that modern scientists are typically atheists. And since scientists are the foremost experts on the mechanics of our universe, with far more information than their illustrious predecessors, it's very telling that most of them are not religious.
Notice he just refuted this before, right? I mean, I don't know what he's going to do. Oh, most scientists in the past were Christian. What's the explanation? I mean, I thought he just dispensed with that, saying that it was a pure coincidence and that they were just taking...
Okay, so this guy is not paying attention. All right, I'm responding to somebody who framed it from the perspective that, Christians are these brilliant scientists and the atheists are these angsty teenagers on Twitter, right? That's the way he framed it. And that's what I have to respond to, right? So what would your rebuttal naturally be to something like that? That being said, even if I were making this argument, right, that he thinks I'm making, his rebuttal still fails. And I would like to take a snippet from the audio in my video that he's responding to, and it's a snippet from the response he just made, and put them side by side so that you can see where the differences lie. Just take a listen.
Oh, most scientists in the past were Christian.
Far more information than their illustrious predecessors.
Oh, most scientists in the past were Christian.
Far more information than their illustrious predecessors.
Another bit of nuance that he does not understand is it's not the same argument to take these two vastly different time periods where most of the scientists are Christian in the past time period and most of the scientists are atheists in the present time period. That's a different argument because the dynamics of those periods are totally different. In the present, you can have a prominent Christian scientist. You can have a Francis Collins, who is a modern day Christian scientist of well renown and respect, right? But in the past, you couldn't have a prominent atheist scientist. You could not have a Stephen Hawking in the past. Richard Dawkins would have been burned at the stake immediately if he said a modicum of the things that he says today, right? So to look at these two different eras and say, well, you said that he couldn't say that, but now you're saying this. No, it's a totally different setting. So the argument changes according to the setting. There were different forces at play during Christian reign than the forces at play in modernity.
Credit. I don't know. This is again, he's contradicting himself here. I don't even know if it's worth going into because it's not an argument, right? Most scientists are atheists or non-believers or agnostics. That's the culture of the modern university. And the culture of the modern university and the development of the modern university came from Christian culture, which is why if you go even 30 years back, most of them would have been some form of Christian.
And if you go even further back than that, they were violently Christian. In other words, if your scientific work was contrary to the Bible, well, you had shit to worry about, didn't you? So, when a Christian comes along and starts bragging about how all the great thinkers of the scientific revolution were Christians, color me shocked when I find that uncompelling. And, when I bring up the fact that most scientists now are atheists, and you find that uncompelling, well, welcome to my world. That's why the video was being made, because the point that you think you're making against me is the very reason for the video that you think you're refuting exists. Talk about ironic. Pull your head out of your ass, man.
David falls all the way back to the Copernican scientific revolution, beginning during the mid-16th century. This was the scientific revolution that birthed modern science and led to the Enlightenment, so it's quite a valuable thing indeed of which to claim ownership. He does this with the beginning of his defibrillator argument. Premise 1, no hypothesis in history has more scientific confirmation than theism. Premise 2, no hypothesis in history has more scientific disconfirmation than atheism. Conclusion, if we have respect for science, we must accept theism and reject atheism.
Okay, I'm going to pause here, although we're going pretty slowly. Again, I have no idea what he's talking. I guess this is some kind of argument that was going on in between Dark Matter 2525 and some apologist. I mean, it has nothing to do with the historical argument, by the way. I mean,
again, the ignorance on display here. This is a response to David Wood. I made that clear. No, he wasn't arguing with me. He was having a formal debate with Michael Shermer. I linked to the debate in the description. No, it does not yet have anything to do with the historical component, but it ties into that, which you would have known if you had done a modicum of research.
Does atheism have evidence against it? I think it does. I don't know. What do you mean by atheism? If it's scientific materialism, I think there's a number of really powerful arguments against it. There is a lot of really good arguments for the existence of a deity, but most of them are logical arguments. Most of them are just a restatement of Thomas Aquinas's arguments for the existence of God. I think they largely remain unanswered to this day. Does it get you the Christian God? Well, not in isolation. No, it doesn't. But I still haven't heard a good response to them. So I guess in that sense, I can see this being set up. I mean, it makes it sound here like with his use of hypothesis, it makes it sound like he's saying that he's done some sort of empirical experiment, and in that case, I have no idea what he's talking about.
Again, if you had bothered to look into this, you would know what he's talking about. He's talking about how the scientific process, how scientific experimentation is possible because the world is intelligible, and it's made intelligible because God exists. God, I wish you had been able to get a hold of me, so that we could have done this together and I could have held your hand and walked you through it. But I guess you wanted to get, I guess this is your version of blood sports or whatever, and you wanted, red meat for your audience, who obviously lapped it up. It's just pathetic. It's sad, really. You straw man the hell out of me.
Notice that if we replace the words theism and atheism with their actual definitions, the premises fail to support the conclusion, for they'd be statements of confirmation of belief and disconfirmation of disbelief, and belief or disbelief have no bearing on the actual truth. So,
okay, I have no idea what that means. When you break down everything, any statement, you can put believe in any fact and turn a scientific proposition into I could do it this way. No hypothesis in history has more scientific confirmation than the belief that the Earth revolves around the sun. No hypothesis in history has more scientific disconfirmation than the disbelief that the Earth revolves around the sun. Oh wow, I just turned heliocentrism into a contest about belief.
Scientifically confirming or disconfirming the existence of a belief or disbelief, not scientifically confirming or disconfirming the existence of a fact or truth. You're not getting the distinction.
Just words, right? There's nothing to do with the actual facts or question we have going on right now.
He's using the words improperly. What he means to say is that science confirms the existence of God. The reason he thinks God has so much scientific confirmation is because he believes that everything we've ever learned from every scientific experiment ever conducted constitutes evidence for God. He does this by crediting Christianity with ownership of the very basis of science, as he describes thusly.
I'm not going to stop here. I mean, I feel like I'm watching some incredible straw man, because this is an incredibly stupid argument. I really doubt this is the full statement of whoever he's arguing against in this.
This is astounding irony. This argument was meticulously preserved, carefully preserved. I took the actual statements from this man's mouth and wrote them down, word for word, and put them in my video. And this distributist guy has done nothing but strawman me while actually listening to the words coming out of my mouth, strawmanning me from the very beginning. And then he did not listen to one word of David Wood, the very person I'm responding to. And he's speculating that I'm strawmanning him because his argument is so fucking dumb. No, it really is that dumb, Mr. Distributist. It really is that dumb. You should listen to it before you respond to my video so that you're apprised of the situation. You, who have done nothing but strawman me, and who is now accusing me of strawmanning somebody who you didn't even listen to. Oh, God, this is going to be a long video.
1. The universe can be understood. 2. We can understand it. And 3. It is good to understand it. Since the scientific endeavor is predicated on these beliefs, every single scientific finding, no matter what it is evidence for God, according to David. This is because David thinks that not until Christianity did people believe that the universe could be understood, that we could understand it, or that it was good to understand it.
So this is an interesting point. I wonder, there could be some interesting things that come out of this question, right? So this gets at an argument for Christianity, both historically, and it's been used at some times as an argument for the existence of God, and that is that, independent of some metaphysical assumptions, we really can't save ourselves from pure skepticism, right? I've talked a little bit about this when I've talked about miracles. Right? Everything we know about the universe and David Hume mentioned this too, it really relies on some understanding that what we're observing right now is intelligible. That there are laws that are in place, and those laws are repeatable, and the repeatability of laws can be organized in the human mind, and those objects can be subject to rationality. Now, I mean, this has been heavily debated over the course of human history. I think the first person to make really big strides on this were obviously the Greeks. People like Pythagoras. He thought he was one of the first people to really understand that, or postulate really, that the universe was really describable in purely logical terms, right? He believed at the base of everything there were just numbers and logic. And that's true, but the problem always was connecting that to actually observing the universe behave in these ways. And this is something that we didn't see for a really long time. So this is something that's been debated a lot, and this is a big, Christianity essentially in the late Middle Ages, and maybe he'll talk a little bit about this, through Thomas Aquinas and through other thinkers, did embrace just these propositions, right? They embraced the idea that there were ordered laws that govern the universe, that we can understand those laws and we can understand their regularity. Now, this may seem like it's something that's just obvious to us currently, right? But what it really came down to for a lot of these Christian thinkers was that we had to be able to understand when something miraculous happened, right? So in order for a miracle to happen, we have to have an understanding of the ordinary operation of nature, and then we have to see that the ordinary operation is disrupted, which means that there has to be an ordinary operation of nature. It has to be discernible by humanity. That's his second thing. And humanity has to be able to understand it and organize it. Now, these three propositions, they sound obvious to us currently. They were not agreed upon by ancient philosophers. Some people thought, and this was mimicked by a lot of Islamic philosophers, that we lived in a purely chaotic universe. We continuously had these issues.
Okay, so for this little section here, we're in agreement. He correctly traces this back to the ancient Greeks, as do I in my video. But even when the argument is right under his nose, what he's failing to realize is that David Wood is crediting Christianity for these propositions, which, I mean, the Distributist correctly pinpointed this on the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, which is pre-Christian. And that's what, like, essentially my whole argument hinges on. Essentially, the Distributist agrees with me. He doesn't know he agrees with me yet because he hasn't watched it, but he agrees with me. He laid it out there. I strongly suspect that as we go on, he's going to do nothing but disagree with me. And I strongly suspect that those disagreements won't actually be with me, but of straw men of me. So we'll see. But I think it's worth noting in the here and now that he agrees with me. While he's still ignorant of my position, I want you to remember that before he knew my position, he agreed with that position. And we'll see if he has a change of heart later, or if he concedes that I'm correct and stays consistent with what he's saying now, which is in agreement with me, that you go back to the ancient Greeks, the pre-Christian Greeks, and that's where you get this. Not from Christianity, but from the Greeks.
I think we're back on track. Pardon me for that hiccup. But yes, these laws were not as obvious as you might think. And if you get down to like the real, like, we have to have a proof for everything, you can't prove either of these propositions. So if you're a skeptic, you still might be struggling with any of these things. I'm going to continue on.
That David is once again using imprecise language. Since the universe is literally everything, all this means is that learning is possible. We can learn, and it is good to learn. Given that, human beings...
Yeah, that's a mistranslation of the question. Learning presupposes that it is knowledge. He's mangling the argument here. The statement when you replace it with learning is not something that would have been heavily debated over in the ancient world. And so we just kind of come to a straw man.
Okay, so this is another case of this guy not listening to my actual words. I said imprecise language. This is obviously not my interpretation. And what I'm doing right now is critiquing the imprecise language that was used. Now, if he had not paused it when he did, he would have heard me elaborate and describe what David is actually talking about. He would have heard me give my actual interpretation of the argument and not my critique of the language. So right now he's mistaking my critique of the language as my actual interpretation, when that is not the case at all. He should not have paused when he did. If only he had listened a little further.
Here.
Have always believed this and done this, or we'd be extinct. So I think what David is actually referring to is the way we look to the natural world as a reference point to systematically gain knowledge.
So you see, right there, I am being charitable. I am doing a better job of explaining David's argument than David himself. So now suddenly I'm in agreement with the Distributist, right? It's no longer a quote unquote a straw man. I explained why it was a bad way to word it that way, and then I put it in a better way. And we'll see if he has a problem with the new way that I put it, and if he retracts his former accusation of a straw man.
Unfortunately for David, this was common practice in ancient Greece, hundreds of years before Christianity. David actually vaguely mentions that there were some scientific advancements in ancient Greece, but glosses over that because there was never a scientific revolution there.
I mean, he's going to use Greece here as an example of his atheist utopia.
Oh, wow. Okay, I wasn't expecting that. All right, first of all, let's go back to what we were saying before. He noticed that he did not retract his accusation of a straw man, even though I elaborated. But secondly, I'm going to use Greece as an example of an atheist utopia. Wow, that's amazing to me. That he would just assert that without giving me a chance. Like, I literally go, like later on in the video, I literally say that no, they put atheists to death, that they had their problems with atheists, right? And I give examples. I provide citations. So the fact that this guy would just recklessly blurt this out and poison the well like that, it's really frustrating. Really frustrating. All right, let's continue. This is fucking depressing.
Utopia. Or I know he's going to. He seems like he is. I mean, the Greeks weren't atheists. The Greeks weren't seculars. They weren't moderns. People like Aristotle and Plato, who are the first people to describe Aristotle, one of the first people to describe physical laws and the way that we use them going forward. These people, he believed in a god. These people believed in metaphysical reality. If you're going to superimpose the Greeks onto secularism, who's us? Who owns these values? Why are they our values?
So because he thinks he knows what I'm going to say, this continues to be a bastardization. This continues to be a straw man. The point now, of course, I know that they believed in the gods, right? They had different gods. That my whole argument is that they weren't Christian. Okay, not everything is atheist versus Christian. All right, you're being very simplistic here. These are people who believed in different gods. These are pre-Christian people. That's my point. Was that these values did not originate with Christianity, which is the argument I'm refuting here. Now, how does that tie in with us? Well, we were directly influenced by the Greeks. Our culture was influenced by the Greeks. The model of our government was influenced by the Greeks. Our culture was tremendously influenced by the Greeks, and I get into that in the video. But you just have to take your little fucking trigger finger off of your mouse button and actually listen to the words that come out of my mouth and not your stupid imaginary version of myself. Okay?
As you'll see, that was his biggest mistake in making this argument. Greece fell, Rome fell, and their knowledge was suppressed by Christian tyranny only to resurface and become a vital part of the very same scientific revolution David credits.
Really? We're doing this Christian suppressed Greek knowledge? I don't even know about this. I mean, this has been refuted so many times by credible historians. I wonder why. I don't know. Do I need to go over it here? I mean, I know that Dean Esme and Todd Lewis did a stream on this, and they probably covered some of this stuff. I mean, it's a ridiculous concept. I mean, there was something called the Dark Ages. I'll grant that. I mean, I think the question is, what were the Dark Ages? And that was the fall of the Roman Empire, when you just had massive destruction of cities in the Western Roman Empire. And in that space, there was very poor preservation of ancient manuscripts that weren't directly related to Christianity in the West. However, you go to Byzantium, you go to the Greek world, and there were libraries that preserved many of these works because they were essential to a lot of thought, which was based on Aristotle and Plato still.
You know, I really wish you would have listened to the whole video before you attempted to refute it, because, you know, I get into this. I get into the nitty-gritty of these details. I talk about the invasion of Constantinople. I talk about the Greek refugees, you know, flooding inland to, you know, and having an influence on the culture. It's, I don't know. It's just, this is depressing. This is just a depressing refutation. It's depressing that people listen to this. It's depressing that people will never hear my response to it, or that people will just lap this up, this garbage.
So this is sort of, a lot of this is sort of copied from sort of anti-Catholic Protestant tracts that came out of the 18th century from a lot of people. They're trying to find a way of blaming the lapse in European learning on the Roman Catholic Church. So they came up with all these narratives of priests, you know, destroying ancient wisdom, and it's really a lot of BS.
Notice how all these arguments hinge on things that I never said, that I don't say in the video. I'm not talking about people destroying literature. Well, actually, you know, I do. There are some well-known historical facts of like the censorship of Galileo, like the censorship of Copernicus, where you actually have him changing the actual texts. You have cases of like Rene Descartes, who actually self-censored, who wrote entire manuscripts that he didn't publish out of fear of the church. These things happened. You can't deny that they happened. Yes, there was suppression going on. Maybe you think it happened to a different degree. But what I'm saying here is that Christianity was the only game in town that you were allowed to have. And if it didn't jive with doctrine, then it did not fucking get accepted, period. And there's a lot of things that are true, that we know to be true, like evolution, like heliocentrism, right? That could not have been accepted back then, because it was, whether you believe it's contradictory to the Bible or not is irrelevant. Maybe you think maybe you think evolution is possible along with the Christian God side by side. Maybe you think they're both true. Whatever, that's irrelevant. The point is, back then, the powers that be would not think that such things are compatible. They did not think that heliocentrism was compatible with doctrine. Okay, whether you think they are or not, irrelevant. The point is, the power back then did not, and you can't deny that. And you can't deny that the fact that had a retarding effect on our progress. You can't deny that. And for you to sit there and be an apologist for this is ludicrous. You don't have, it's not your fault. I'm not saying it's your fault. You can look to the history of the things that you believe in and disown it and say, hey, that wasn't me. That this history isn't, I don't accept that. I don't approve of that. Right? You can do that. You can distance yourself from the history of your religion. I'm perfectly willing to accept that. But for you to defend it or deny it, that's terrible. That's ridiculous. Don't do that. You're being dishonest or naive. That's the way you'll be perceived, as dishonest or naive.
Attila the Hun sacking Rome has nothing to do with Christianity. In many ways, the consolidation of Christianity after the Dark Ages was the fulfillment of the main project of the Vatican. And atheists will admit this if you actually ask them about it, but it doesn't come up with the propaganda.
Christianity for causing. You'll see once again that it was Christianity that fought tooth and nail against something that caused greatness, only for Christianity to take all the credit once the greatness was realized. Historically, this has been Christianity's typical MO. Fight a war against progress, lose that war against progress, and when that progress turns out to be a good thing after all, claim credit for that progress.
He's also missing the part funding that progress, creating institutions like universities that facilitate that progress. I mean...
No, I didn't miss that part. I actually, if you listen a little further into the video, I admit that part. I admit that the university was a Christian creation. I didn't leave that out, but you have to... This is why it behooves you to pay attention to the video, to listen to watch the video before you respond to it. I realize I'm not doing that right now. I'm not practicing what I'm preaching right now. I haven't heard the rest of your video, but I know what you're responding to. I know I lived it. I made it. I'm reacting to your reacting. Let's see how bad it gets.
Well, we're just going through this.
David makes his case for Christianity being the cause of the scientific revolution by pointing out that all of the scientists at that time were Christians. And to find out why they devoted their lives to understanding the universe, he provides various quotes from those scientists. This is a very flawed way to present the argument.
Why?
To truly understand why the scientific revolution happened, it requires an extensive study of much more than the scientists themselves, but rather what was going on in that region politically, socially, philosophically, technologically, and yes, religiously.
I mean, what was going on in this region was, this is sort of a misnomer too. I'm sure he's going to bring up like 1500 as the real turning point in Western civilization. Really, the real turning point was 1000. After 1000, that's where you get the creation of these big cities like Cologne and Paris and later Vienna and Berlin. The cities that would...
So ironically, it's the Christian I'm responding to, who, if I remember correctly, is the one who says it's 1500, and I go back earlier. So it's his ally, it's his fellow Christian that is making the claim that he says, that he predicts that I'm going to make. I go back earlier to the discovery of the Greek texts and subsequently Aquinas.
And Florence became a big deal. These were the cities that became the basis for the scientific revolution. And they came about because Christianity had finally consolidated its power in Europe. And it was no longer fighting, to a certain degree, it was no longer fighting a lot of these pagan invaders like the Vikings. And you could have growth.
So let's save the scientists for the end and dig into what actually caused the scientific revolution in the first place. Why were Christians the pioneers of the scientific revolution? David is more than happy to answer for we atheists by saying, atheists often insist that it was just dumb luck. Anyone could have done it, and if Europe had been filled with atheists, it would have happened even faster. As you will see, however, luck more aptly describes David's explanation. He goes on.
Okay, now I'm going to make a prediction here. I'm going to say that as he watches this timeline, he's going to assume that it's my argument, because he hasn't actually watched what I'm responding to and doesn't know that what I'm presenting on the screen is David's argument, not mine. So let's just see if that happens. Again, I've never seen this. I'm just going to make a prediction, and I'm going to leave this statement in whether I'm right or wrong. I don't care. Let's see.
On to note that there were cultures and civilizations around the world that had the opportunity to study astronomy, physics, chemistry, and biology, but these branches of science all took off at roughly the same time in one particular civilization. When we investigate why this is so, David says, what we find is people who believe that the universe is intelligible because of their theistic beliefs, that they're rational because...
Okay, I'm going to pause it here. What the fuck? I'm sorry, swearing. What the fuck? You have to label your axes. Your axes. Where are your axes on this graph? Everybody who's ever gone through college knows you can't present a graph with no axes. What are we measuring on the y-axis? I mean, it's obvious the x-axis is time, right? Okay, time and science-y stuff. I mean, how is that measured? What are the units? You know, well, let's call the units Nyeisms, right? After Bill Nye, right? Just how sciencey things are, right? So you know, we got one.
I don't want to interrupt what is sure to be a hilarious rant, but it says it at the top. Scientific progress. Okay, it's not meant to be anything spectacular. It's just a visual representation of somebody's argument. No big deal. Calm down. True, there are no units of measurement for you to go by, but again, this isn't mine. This is David Wood. David Wood refers to it as scientific progress. David Wood, the guy I'm responding to, is not offering any units of measurement for you. The reason you are failing right now is because you did not do the proper research. The reason why your joke is dumb is because you did not do the proper research. And also you didn't read the screen.
Bill Nye year one, and it kind of carries over, and then all of a sudden we start accumulating sciencey Bill Nyes in the year 1500. I mean, this is ridiculous. We lose all of the progress that we got in engineering through 1,000 years of human history, right? We don't, obviously, if we start at year one, we don't measure any of the adoptions we get in the early Roman Empire. I mean, obviously, this is a little bit after Archimedes, but similar thinkers were around, Galen at that time.
Okay, so my prediction was absolutely correct. He's doing exactly what I thought he would do. He's, rubbing his hands together and he thinks he's refuting me, but he's actually just refuting David Wood, his fellow Christian. He's taking this absurd argument that I am depicting and refuting it, when in actuality it's not my argument at all. This is just a visual representation of somebody else's argument, and he is swooping in, pointing out how ridiculous dark matter 2525 is. And he doesn't even understand, because he didn't do the proper research, that this is not my position. This is the position of the person to which I am responding. So this is what happens when you don't do your due diligence, when you don't actually look into the background of the things that you decide that you're just going to fucking refute, off the fly in front of an audience. This is a very reckless thing to do. Research the background of the things that you refute. If someone's doing a response video and you want to respond to it, go ahead and watch the thing they're responding to first.
So none of that's measured. None of the engineering achievements measured from 1000 onward. We're apparently not measuring this.
As you will.
Suddenly we start gaining our Nyeisms in year 1500. Pulled out of a hat.
Okay, what I'm displaying on the screen and that part of the video, that timeline, that's a reductio ad absurdum. And what this guy is doing is he's mistaking this reductio ad absurdum for my position. Just incredibly frustrating. What you're going to see later on in the video is me actually plugging in the nuance of this timeline. Like, I take this timeline now and it looks ridiculous, and what I do in the later on in the video is I slam all these labels like, hey, this was going on, that was going on, this was going on, that was going on, and then you see a sudden dramatic increase in scientific activity. And I'm really interested in how he's going to react to that. Like, is he going to come back to what he was saying now and give a retraction? I'm 99.9% certain he won't. We'll see.
I guess it's because the Reformation or whatever. And this would again indicate sort of that he's repeating, sort of Protestant tracks, right? I mean, 1500. The only thing I can think of as being relevant there is the Reformation. We have the printing press a little bit earlier. We have the mainstay of the scientific revolution a little bit after, and that's the year they pick. Looks like I got a super chat. So I'm going to take a pause here and answer this question. Okay, apologize to breaking the flow, but thank you very much to Perennial Plant Yaman. So I guess we'll just do a little bit of a coda here. Was World War I the worst war in history? It maimed Christendom. It gave birth to Bolshevism and Leninism. It led to fascism and Nazism, and Europe's best and brightest. Yes, I think it was the worst war in history. I don't know if we'll ever know that question because we just don't have perspectives. We don't actually know what it was like to live through the 30 Years' War in the same way that we know what it was like to live through the First World War. We don't know what civilization would have come had the 30 Years' War not happened. That's the question I honestly wonder. What if we hadn't had a huge war that tore Europe apart due to the Reformation? I mean, to a large degree, now I'll disagree here, and you'll have to take my word for it, but the scientific revolution that he's going to reference here was well underway by the time the Reformation started. And it would be an open question what would have happened if Europe had been unified, if it hadn't been tearing itself apart in wars. But to get back to the questioners, the super chat Perennial Plants question, World War I it's the direct cause of all of the difficulties we're having right now with what people call cultural Marxism, what's generally perceived accurately, I think, as the West's decline in confidence, what we see as the general decline in our ability to produce art that's actually beautiful. It was all essentially gunned out of the West at the Somme. That was the moment at which European man looked at himself and said, I am not worthy of actually being proud of my civilization. And, of course, it didn't happen immediately, right?
Okay, so it's becoming increasingly clear that this guy has a very narrow field of vision. Of course, he's trotting out the cultural Marxism is destroying society, and there's no great artists anymore, and blah blah blah. And that's because he's very sheltered. Let me put the work of this Nigerian artist on the screen right now. She did these. I tweeted about her a few weeks ago, but you can see she's doing completely photorealistic artwork with charcoal, hyper-realistic charcoal artist. Stunning works of art. And the thing that's truly amazing is that this is sort of commonplace nowadays. But what a lot of right-wingers do is they'll take these modern artists who, they'll draw a red line on a canvas and it'll end up in some art gallery somewhere. And they'll point at that, they'll focus on that and say, look at the direction society is headed. Oh, we are losing everything. And meanwhile, you'll have a Nigerian woman who is drawing people that you would swear that this is a photograph, but it's not. It's a charcoal drawing, right? And No, ignore that. You know, there are definite racial undertones to this whole, destruction of civilization thing. When you do have people who aren't white, let's face it, who are accomplishing things and who are being focused upon, rather than these basement dwelling white dudes who want to take credit for modernity, based on the fact that people who shared their complexion had these great accomplishments, and they want to sort of they want to get some residual off of that because they haven't accomplished anything of their own other than happening to be born a similar complexion, but they'll totally ignore wonderful artistic achievements that are going on every minute of every day. There's the art world is filled with vibrance and stunning beauty. And these ignoramuses will watch a Paul Joseph Watson video and think that everything is red lines on canvases now. It's frustrating. It really is. It's frustrating. And these people, they have an audience. I hate to, bring it back to racism, but, it does stoke the fires of racism. And we have to be real about that, because simpletons make simple connections. They'll look at the color of people's skin and they'll make assumptions and they'll just go with it. And the longer an idea stays in your head, the older you get, the harder it's going to be to pry that idea out of your head, no matter how wrong it is.
So let's not idealize the Victorian age, right? We need to see the Victorian age as the people who brought about World War I in a very real way. The people who came after them, like the Virginia Woolf and these other people like Herman Hesse, they weren't completely wrong about that. So World War I was the turning point, but we shouldn't kid ourselves about the manifest lurking poison that was really manifest when Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. But thank you very much for the question. If I don't keep on going, I'm going to completely lose track of the mainstay. Again, thanks for that very generous super chat.
God is rational, and they were made in the image of God. So, by setting out to understand it, they're worshiping God. Bam! Christianity gets the credit for science. Case closed.
Yeah.
Right?
Again, we don't have an axis. All we're measuring is naiisms. We're not measuring progress because we don't have any units on the y-axis. And of course, we've ignored all the scientific achievements that were gained during the early Roman era and during the early medieval period.
So again, we have to reiterate that this is not my position, okay? This is the position of my opponent, who says, the scientific revolution was a sudden explosion of scientific progress at one particular time and one particular place, and that we have Christianity to thank for it. And the purpose of my illustration is to show the ancient age of Christianity. Christianity was already ancient by the time the scientific revolution occurred. So, maybe starting it at maybe 300 AD and then moving on from there. But still, we're still talking about at least 1,000 years of Christian hegemony before this sudden explosion of scientific progress, which was allegedly because of Christianity, which at this point had already enjoyed dominance for 1,000 years.
Not so fast. Let's take off our God goggles and look at what actually happened.
God goggles, that's a good one. Good one. I bet he patted himself on the back for thinking of that one.
First, let's clear atheists of the incompetence David implies. He boasts about how it was Christians, not atheists, who began the scientific revolution. David's argument is a classic supremacist argument. One of the reasons...
Supremacist. I think it's called everybody a supremacist who you don't like. It's a great word, right? If I don't like progressives, I'll just call them liberal supremacists.
I didn't want to make assumptions about this guy, but it's really not surprising that he would take umbrage with my usage of supremacist. It's sort of obvious, when somebody boasts about being proud of your culture and cultural Marxism, and they're being unironic. They're going to take issue with concepts of supremacy as a negative thing, having an air of superiority over other people because of who you are, where you came from, things like that. There's going to be people who embrace it and who are going to be honest about it and say, yes, we're superior. And what happens then is you get things like Nazis, and that's the slippery slope of it, right? People who embrace it and decide that person XYZ is superior, and we need to mold society to be of them and for them. Then you're going to start to get atrocities. But then you're going to have people like this guy who are going to be apologists. Maybe this guy, you can't call him a Nazi, but he's the type of person who can lay the foundation for, a fascist type ideology. He's going to be the water carrier. He's going to be the guy who, they're going to get arguments from.
Like progressives, I'll just call them liberal supremacists. Yeah, you're liberal supremacism. That's great. Oh yeah. You like Mexican food. You're a taco supremacist.
Okay, so now here he is trying to twist this into a reductio ad absurdum. Of course, when we say supremacy, we're not just saying, oh, we like this thing better. No, we're saying not only do you like it better, but you're trying to forcefully impose it.
Okay, great. I love that word. I really want to do a series called Magical Words, where we just go over all these little buzzwords progressives use to indicate, their virtue.
Now, of course, this guy can afford to scoff at supremacy. He doesn't have to worry about it. What I mean by it is, all you have to do is look at the screen. I'm talking about one group oppressing another group. And like it or you can deny it all you want, but that happens. Okay. Some groups oppress other groups. It's a thing that you cannot deny has occurred historically and continues to occur today. You can debate about the degree to which it occurs between one group and another. But when we're talking about supremacy, this is what we're talking about. And this is established historical fact. And if this guy wants to, be all blasé about it and, look at this idiot progressive, this cultural Marxist talking about supremacy. I love that word. I want this guy to experience just a little bit of the inverse. Go back to the Middle Ages and openly profess atheism, and then laugh about supremacy, and then let's have a big fucking joke about supremacy, when the flames are burning your flesh, and I can look at you and laugh. Supremacy. Remember that YouTube video when you were joking about supremacy? Isn't that fucking funny? No, you know what? It's not funny. It's not funny at all. We're talking about people's lives. And I know that you can afford to joke about it because it doesn't really affect you. It's not something that you have to worry about. You don't have to worry about anybody oppressing you. So you get to laugh. You get to be an asshole. And so, I know, so it's all a big joke. It's all a big joke to you. Yeah, I get it. But that's why I'm not laughing, because I actually get it.
Supremacy has got to be on there, right? So
Supremacist arguments are so bad is that they usually don't account for oppression as a variable.
Well, that was double whammy. Oppression is a variable. Oh, what are we going to measure that one? Okay, so scientific progress can be measured in niisms. Let's
And did it even surprise you that this guy would be blasé about oppression? You know, did that surprise anyone that he would find a way to joke about oppression? And now, when I'm talking about oppression within the context of, the scientific revolution, I'm talking about being burned at the stake. I mean, that's awful. That's horrific. And this guy is sitting there comfortably in his house, fat and lazy, just drunk off life, just completely ignorant about suffering, most likely. I know earlier I said that I don't make any assumptions about this guy, but at this point, he has said enough to where I think it's safe to make some assumptions. Like when you start making fun of oppression, and when I'm talking about oppression, I'm talking about people being burned at the stake. I'm talking about the oppression of anybody who would be deemed a non-believer during, the Middle Ages, which would not be a pleasant thing to endure. The fact that this guy is blasé about shit like that, it kind of tells me that he's never experienced any like real tribulation in his life, at least not based upon any sort of demographics that he belongs to. Maybe he's been sick or experienced some financial hardship or something like that in his life, but it's a whole nother thing to experience tribulation because of something that you can't really control, because of maybe your sincerely held belief about something, or because of the color of your skin, or something like that. Experiencing true pain, like torture, because of that. I don't think that he would be joking around about it the way he is right now, if he had ever experienced anything like that. He gets to be comfortable and he gets to make fun because he's ignorant and comfortable in his life, and he doesn't have the proper amount of empathy that somebody who has not experienced these things yet has the mental capability of being able to put themselves in the shoes of others. And, maybe you don't have a good enough imagination to know what it's like to be burned alive, or in this day and age, to be, fired for being an atheist, or to not be able to be elected to a public office or whatever. Maybe you don't have the mental fortitude to be able to, pause your ego. Just put your ego on pause and try to imagine what it's like. Then maybe you would think twice about joking around about it. Ooh, oppression, ooh. You don't know what you're talking about.
Let's measure oppression variable. Well, maybe he'll give a variable, but if he doesn't give a variable, let's call that Sarkeesians, right? So the question is exactly what's our nigh to Sarkeesian ratio here, right? I mean that's the real thing, right? Because how many nihisms can we generate per Sarkeesianisms we suffer, right? So if I suffer 3 Sarkeesianisms, right, and I generate just one nihism, I still got like a good ratio there, right?
I have no problem with laughing at jokes at my expense, but that they actually have to be funny. This is getting very cringy. I strongly suggest that you move on from this. This is dumb.
We got to take that into account.
He's boasting about the accomplishments of his group, the oppressor, over the lack of accomplishments of the oppressed group, the atheists.
Oh my God, I didn't know this. This is pure Marxist history. I mean, I was actually expecting something more like TJ, the Amazing Atheist, or Sargon. This is just a repeat of. I mean, this is Marxism. People who maybe are always not a communist. He doesn't believe in state control of industry. This is actually what people mean when they say cultural Marxism, and
This is remarkable. Saying the words cultural Marxism is not a refutation. Now, I realize that you've probably cultivated an audience that has a Pavlovian response to the words cultural Marxism. So you get to be lazy and all you have to do is say these words, cultural Marxism, and that counts as a refutation in your little world. But I mean, are you actually going to deny the fact that within the context of this place and this time, that there was not oppression going on? Are you seriously going to deny that? No, I'm not framing all the whole thing from the aspect of oppression, but what I am doing is framing the actual subject matter about which this video was about this particular topic. And when we're talking about this particular topic of culture, this subset of the topic of this culture, oppression was a factor. Are you going to deny that you could not openly profess atheism back then, and if you did, it meant your life? You cannot deny that and not be a revisionist, and a laughable revisionist at that. Nobody's going to take you seriously when you're saying stuff like that. Are you going to deny that oppression is a significant dynamic all throughout history? Are you going to dismiss every examination of how oppression affected culture as are you just going to toss it up to, oh, this is cultural Marxism, we get to dismiss it? Because if you're going to do that, I'd like to draw attention to the very symbol of your religion, which is literally a torture device. A torture device that was used to kill Christians. Your religion is based in oppression. Your religion could not exist if oppression did not exist. Jesus Christ, the early Christians, were all oppressed. And Christianity has gone so far, it's so far gone that we have people who are actual Christians, who believe in Jesus Christ, who are scoffing at oppression now. That's how far the mighty have fallen.
It's the reason why we associate modern SJWs with Marxism, even though they're not literal Communist Party members. And it's this idea that you can understand history by dividing history into oppressors and oppressed.
You see how he has to take it to the extreme. I'm not dividing history, okay? I'm talking about this particular subset of this culture. I'm talking about the dynamic of atheist achievements at that time versus Christian achievements at that time, which was the subject matter of the debate that David Wood was having with Michael Shermer. It's a very specific topic. And what this ignoramus is doing, because he has no idea about the previous conversation that occurred, is he's extrapolating that to me talking about, all of society, all of culture being framed from the oppressor to the oppressed. I'm not doing that. I'm talking about this little tiny specific thing. There was a lot more things about life going on than religious conflict.
Oppressed. This was the functional mechanism that Marx had for understanding history. He used class struggle. Here, he's using atheism. And feminism would use women, right? They would say that women were the oppressed class. Therefore, if we didn't have patriarchy, we would have had a scientific revolution in 2000 BC. You can just say that, right? Because, oh, look, all the inventors are men. That's because they were the oppressors.
Okay, so he basically is denying it. He is denying that. Why is it that most of the scientists today are atheists, but there weren't any scientists who were atheists who professed atheism back then? Why is that? Why did all of a sudden these atheists spring out of nowhere? Do you think that atheists just suddenly started to exist? No, of course not. There were always atheists all throughout history, but they couldn't profess their atheism. Oh, why do you think that is? I mean, you can deflect all you want and say, oh, this is just framing everything from the oppressor and the oppressed and, cultural Marxism. And, feminists say that, it's because women were oppressed. Well, let me ask you a question. how many female scientists were there during the scientific revolution? And how many female scientists are there today? Make the comparison. Sure, there are way more male scientists even today, but now there is the existence of female scientists and even prominent female scientists. And that simply is not a thing that happened back then. And do you think that didn't happen back then because, oh, well, women just weren't interested in science? No, of course not. I hate to be the one to break it to you, but yes, the oppression of women did exist. You can't deny it without being a revisionist. I'm sorry, but yes, the oppression of atheists did exist, which inherently involved their suppression. You can't deny that without being a revisionist. Yes, I'm sorry, the oppression of black people did exist. You can't deny that without being a revisionist, right? Or are you going to say what? What are you implying here? That there weren't any female scientists back then because females are inferior? Is that what you're implying? Or that we don't have any black scientists from back then? Why? Because black people are what? They're inferior? Huh? Is that what you're getting at? I mean, spell it out for us. Because this is the implications of what you're saying.
Would have been burned at the stake back then. This is adding insult to injury. Of course, his group accomplished more than the groups they were oppressing. What else would we expect? Now that
So, I mean, this also imagines that Christians were oppressing all of the non-theistic religions like Buddhism thousands of miles away, right? I mean, this doesn't explain anything about why European civilization would have taken this step, but...
Of course, okay, so this is the problem with responding to a video that you've never seen before, because I do get into that, of course. He gets to make this little glib point, and then, that's a little check mark in his favor in the minds of his audience. But when I address this, he's not going to go back and say, oh, okay, he did address this, right? No, this is going to be totally forgotten by him. He's going to totally forget that he said this and move on and make some other kind of glib point, right? But, I talk about the influence of ancient Greece, about the rediscovery of ancient Greek culture. That didn't happen in Buddhism. That didn't happen in China. That happened in Europe.
But
variable of oppression has been affected, however, and the playing field is more even. Can we still say that is so? No.
The playing field is even when we have cultural dominance of my group, right? This is always the thing, right?
This man actually believes that atheists enjoy cultural dominance. That is how weak he is. He can sit there and call everybody else SJWs and snowflakes. But when atheists enjoy some success in a given area, like in science, no, you can't just flip my argument back against me and say that, how come this isn't because of oppression? Well, because you actually have to fucking point it out. Where are the Christians who are being burned at the stake, like the atheists were? Where are the prominent Christian scientists' peer-reviewed papers being rejected, not because they're actually being, their claims are being investigated, but because they're being dismissed as believing in Jesus Christ as the Lord and Savior? Where is that happening? Point it out to me. Do your due diligence and point it out to me. You don't get to just flip my argument. We're not living in reverse Middle Ages, okay? You can be a prominent Christian Science. You could head the Human Genome Project. As long as your science is solid, as long as your papers are good, and you're going through peer review and your claims are being verified, you can be a prominent scientist. That's the world we live in today. You're not going to compare that to the world of the scientific revolution and say that, oh, if oppression was a factor, back then of course it has to be, a factor in the inverse now, because now atheists dominate science. So no, that's fucking intellectually lazy. You have to understand the dynamics of the times that we're living in, which are very different from the past.
The playing field is even in any place where we dominate. And this is why the oppression metric is so useless, right? Because eventually when the communists or Marxists take power in a university or in any institution or in a government, right, they'll have to establish a government. And that government will be comprised of people who speak on the behalf of the oppressed. And suddenly the people with the power are oppressed. And so that's why you have, more women in college, but are women now oppressive in college? Well, of course not, because their dominance is earned. And it's really nothing more than an argument from one. I mean, it basically is sort of it's almost a nationalist argument. I mean, it selects one group and says everything that you didn't do in history, it's because someone was oppressing you, but everything you achieved was your own making, right? So, the dominance of Christians in the universities were in the 18th century, right, was due to the fact that atheists were oppressed. Even though David Hume existed, but the presence of atheists in the universities because we've got an even playing field. How do I know we've got an even playing field? Well, it's because more of my group is in the university. Completely self-referential.
Of course not. If we look at our top scientists now, they're mostly atheists.
Yeah, we know that it's an even playing field because they're mostly atheists, and it's an even playing field because they're mostly atheists. Self-referential.
That's true even in the United States, where atheists are still a tiny minority. Let that sink in. As soon as you're no longer allowed to kill this tiny minority, suddenly that same tiny minority becomes the majority of your top minds.
You'd also see this from a number of things too, right? I mean, the culture in the university itself is a non-believing culture. So, and also a lot of the people he showed aren't atheists; they were agnostics or light deists. He's now expanded atheism to include basically anyone who isn't a Christian.
Okay, so now he's obviously ignorant about what agnosticism means. You can be an agnostic and an atheist at the same time. Those terms are not mutually exclusive. And of course, he's saying, well, these people were light deists, so, point them out. Explain what you're talking about. Not everybody, there's plenty of atheists who used to be Christian, as well. Or even atheists who were atheists when they made their scientific discoveries and became Christian later on. Be a little more accurate. What are you talking about? Were they light deists when they made their scientific discoveries? Were they always light deists? Did their views change throughout their life? You don't just throw this stuff out. Stop the video. It would have been best if you actually watched the video first and then, went through point by point and made your responses. Stop it when you see somebody who you think was a light deist and then go and investigate, if that was so, if they were never an atheist, and then you can put that in your video and point that out and actually not be lazy. And as far as your excuse as, the atheist culture dominating universities, I mean, are you actually suggesting that if a Christian made a big scientific discovery, that everyone's just going to ignore it? Sweep it under the rug because they're a Christian? Ridiculous. Christians are free to excel in science. The better question to ask is, okay, so why do atheists enjoy dominance now? How did this happen? How is it that in a culture that is still by and large dominated by Christianity, how is it that atheists have managed to carve out this little niche for themselves in science? Well, I think that's because of just the nature of what it takes to be an atheist. Not everybody arrives at the correct answer for good reasons. And not everybody is wrong for bad reasons. There's good reasons to believe wrong things and there's bad reasons to believe good things. Okay, I get that. But think about what it takes to be an atheist in the 20th century in the United States, and even somewhat into the 21st century too. You're living in a society that is largely Christian, that accepts Christianity as a normal thing, and you even have a large portion of the population who are actively trying to impose it on people. And you have atheism, which is something that is still very stigmatized in our culture, in modern day United States of America. Now, what does it take to be an atheist in that environment? To be somebody who rejects the common narrative, that the common religious belief of the day, who looks at the Bible and reads it and says, you know what, I don't buy this. I don't believe this. Despite the fact that all of my friends and family believe it, despite the fact that, this is thought of as, common and good and natural, and atheists are thought of as bad and immoral. What does it take? It takes a skeptical mind. It takes somebody who is willing to question, commonly held beliefs. And I think that somebody like that is going to be naturally more fitting toward the role of a scientist. Science is about skepticism. Science is about, questioning why things are happening and not accepting, just this traditional answer. It's about investigating phenomena and claims and finding out if they're true in a repeatable, testable way, a way that we could describe as reality. So I think that far from atheists now enjoying dominance because there's some sort of flipping of the roles, and that now the universities are anti-Christian, and that's why there's no more Christian scientists. No, I think that being a skeptical person, and there are skeptical Christians, mind you, but the vast majority of people who accept religion are not skeptics. They're lemmings. They're sheep. They're blind followers. They are presented with a world, and they accept that world. Their parents present it to them when they're children, and it becomes a part of them. And if you attack it, you are attacking them. They can't separate their ego from it. And that's not conducive to being a scientist. But being a non-believer and rejecting these things, even though that people have attempted to drill them into you, even though maybe your parents or your family, your society has attempted to drill this into you, and the fact that you rejected it, you studied it, and you found these flaws in it, and you were skeptical and you rejected it, that's conducive to scientific thinking. And that's why I think that once atheists were allowed to fucking live, that they actually succeeded in fields of science.
Anyone who isn't a Christian. So where we're kind of playing games here, right? I mean, and atheism hasn't, throughout the scientific revolution, you weren't executed for being an atheist. So is that revisionist history too?
This is insanity. I mean, there were people who were executed for rejecting the Trinity. These people were theists, and they were being executed just for rejecting the Trinity. An atheist inherently rejects the Trinity. What are you thinking? All right, I'm beginning now. It's gotten to the point where this guy isn't. When you're saying stuff like this, I mean, he's just not. I feel like I wasted my time with this now, but I have to see it through because I've already spent so much time on this. But God, this is a waste of time. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
Very telling, isn't it? Maybe theists should have tried listening to us rather than killing us and censoring us. David's argument doesn't even make sense from a logical standpoint. The scientific revolution happened suddenly and proceeded very quickly. As the influential
do you know anyone where he got those dates? I mean, they're pretty. Maybe he's talking about Galileo to Newton?
Oh my God, no. I'm going from Copernicus to Galileo. But I do include Newton in there. So, yeah, I guess I could have stretched it out a little bit more.
I'm just guessing, but
historian, physicist, and philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn pointed out, scientific progress is based on paradigm shifts, which is what causes scientific revolutions in the first place. During the Copernican scientific revolution, however, Christianity was already a 1,500-year-old established norm.
Yep. No paradigm shifts in there. No developments in our understanding of how logic worked. No understandings in how.
What do you think you're refuting? What? I haven't even gotten into the paradigm shifts yet. Like I go through some of them. I'm not denying that they happened. I'm saying that David ignored them. See, this is the fucking frustrating thing. This is the problem with people who don't research what they're watching. This is a response video to somebody who doesn't understand paradigm shifts. I get into it. What the fuck are you doing? What are you refuting? You're not refuting me.
Our idea of reality worked. Thomas Aquinas never existed.
Thomas Aquinas never existed. This is why you don't respond to a video before you actually watch the whole thing first. Because I talk about Thomas Aquinas in this video, right? And this is a man who's looking at this image and not understanding what I'm saying about paradigm shifts. He's not listening. He's not looking. He's not listening. He's invented this straw man atheist in his head who's not actually responding to somebody who's making these arguments. A fellow Christian, mind you. And he's just, and all these points that he's making that I address, he's just going to forget that he made these points and be like, oh, I guess I shouldn't have said that. He does get into this. That's not going to fucking happen. You watch. And if it does, I'll take it back.
Galen never existed. None of the late Romans ever existed.
When a paradigm shift occurs, we simply do not look to a 1,500-year-old cultural norm as the cause. As the question quickly arises, why did this widespread, brutally enforced, ancient cultural norm called Christianity fail to produce anything like a scientific revolution for 1,500 years, the first full 75% of its entire existence, only to then spontaneously, simultaneously inspire a bunch of scientists to trigger the scientific revolution?
Oh, God, this is getting boring. I've already answered this objection.
No, I couldn't find any historian who believes that. David's explanation is more luck-based.
By the way, you'll find numerous historians that will say that Christianity was a major impetus and starter of the scientific revolution.
Notice that wasn't the actual claim that I was refuting. I'm talking about the inspiration. I know that Christianity contributed to certain factors that facilitated the scientific revolution, and I do get into that. I don't say that Christianity had nothing to do with it whatsoever, which is what he thinks I'm saying. When I'm talking about influence. And for 1,500 years, Christianity was an influence. To a larger extent, around 300 or so years after Jesus' birth. But, that influence existed for a very long time. And that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about logistics. Of course, Christianity contributed, had made some pretty big contributions in a logistical fashion to the rise of the scientific revolution, and I don't deny that. I never denied that.
Than anything history has to tell us. To find the real answer, we need to look at what changed, not at what stayed the same. As it just so happens, that era was filled with change. After Rome fell, ancient Greek philosophy, science, literature, and politics, which heavily influence Western culture today, were largely lost.
By the way, people who do not know the history of Rome, all of the developments in Rome came really early, around Jesus' time. A little bit before, a little bit afterwards. The stagnation that's kicked in culturally around after the Trajan emperors was massive. You can even look at statues, and the decline in quality was massive, right? So this is something that I'm sure he's not gonna mention that, right? He's gonna act like the decline kicked in as soon as Christianity consolidated some kind of majority in southern Italy. But whatever.
This knowledge was discovered by the Arabs, who translated and preserved the knowledge in Arabic. It's no coincidence.
This is highly over. There were preservations of some of the ancient Greek texts in the Arabic world. A lot of it also was Byzantium. But you can't mention Byzantium in the Eastern Roman Empire because that would destroy your narrative of an ignorant period between 500 AD and 1000 AD. We can't have that, right? So we're writing the Byzantines out of history, right? And largely this is what Islamic history does too. I mean, a lot of their contributions were building off of Byzantine contributions as well, but they don't exist, right? I mean, Turkey has succeeded in erasing them as a quantity, and so we can just include them in part of the Islamic world.
That many Muslims claim Islam is responsible for the creation of science, just as David claims Christianity is responsible. Guess why? While the Islamic world did produce some scientific advancements during its golden age, that came to an end as Mongols invaded around the exact same time ancient Greek knowledge was finally rediscovered by Europeans.
Oh, wow. So it's almost like invasions have more to do with the loss of knowledge than actually religion.
Oh, wow. It's almost like religion and invasion aren't mutually exclusive factors.
Who translated it from Arabic to Latin and introduced it to Europe during the 12th century, which, as any historian will tell you, was the reason for a major turning point in history.
A major turning point in history in the 13th and 12th century, but dark matter, your graph had all the knives going up in the 15th century.
And this is the type of fool you make out of yourself when you don't do your research and realize that the graph was not what I was saying, but what David was saying. So now you're just making an idiot out of yourself.
With absolutely no scientific development during that time. So where the hell was this? Again, he's just contradicting himself. I mean, there were developments in mathematics during this time, quite clearly not present on the graph, right? I wonder how the oppression points stack up, right? Were the Muslims or the Christians oppressed during this time? Like, I don't know. Well, we'll just keep on going. I'm almost getting bored of this.
What is there to say? Astounding ignorance. He's looking at someone else's argument and saying that it's me, that I'm making that argument. And then he's looking at my refutation in real time and saying that I'm contradicting what I said earlier. And the reason I'm contradicting it is because I'm arguing against it. And he's such a fucking idiot that he doesn't look into what I'm arguing against. He doesn't even realize I'm actually arguing against that graph. It's frustrating. It's frustrating when people do shit like this.
Being bored of this.
This was something new to them, something different, something we can look to as a reason for a paradigm shift, precisely what is necessary for a scientific revolution. The recovery of ancient Greek philosophy culminated during the 13th century, coinciding perfectly with the Renaissance.
Now we have 4 paradigm shifts. Wonder why we didn't mention that before, or actually reflected on the graph.
Of course, everybody listening to me right now knows why, but this guy is still wallowing in his ignorance and combining that with his arrogance, which is always an extremely ugly combination. And doesn't he look foolish?
Subsequent science.
I guess they were the kind of paradigm shifts that didn't generate nihilisms, right? You don't get to the sciencey stuff until you actually can have a good narrative about how something was suppressed by the evil church.
Scientific revolution, a much more narrow timeline than the 1500 years Christianity had to allegedly inspire this sudden change. On the contrary, rather than inspire the scientific revolution, Christianity delayed it. Aristotle had views that were deemed incompatible with Christian belief. He did not believe in divine intervention, but determinism. He also
He believed in a God, though. He actually even offered proofs for the existence of God. Not on this dossier. Kind of left that one out.
See, this guy is such a simpleton that he thinks that I'm taking the side of Aristotle, right? He thinks that I'm claiming Aristotle as one of my people because he's such a fucking simpleton. When I'm actually refuting claims by providing evidence, that by providing people who I would disagree with. I'm saying, no, this isn't because of, Christianity. I'm pointing to pre-Christian people, not because they're people with whom I agree, but because they're the correct refutation. I'm being intellectually honest and using people with whom I would actually disagree with. It would be extremely difficult to get this simpleton to understand something like that.
And this is also it's 400 years before before Christ, not even before the ascendancy. It's 800 years before any consolidated Christian groups even emerged on Europe. So, an interesting person to start with.
Believed not in divine revelation, but rather that knowledge could only be gained through direct observation and reasoning. That sounds a lot like science.
Ooh, oh, no. Aristotle wrote about metaphysics. Metaphysics is not science.
I never said that it was science. I said that this particular aspect of this person sounds like science. It's a precursor to science. Okay, I get that. Not everything has to be the perfect puzzle piece.
Not science. So, again, now we're subsuming. Now, Aristotle, his work cannot be understated. If you're a Westerner, you have to acknowledge Aristotle as the father of Western thought. In a large way, he's one of the main contributors. And he's the reason why we're searching for physical laws in a really big way.
Which is why I didn't actually say any of those things, and you're just beating a straw man at this point, which is your favorite pastime, it seems.
Big way. But to say that Aristotle was a scientist because he can fish out a few things that he did, and he didn't make any other contributions in metaphysics or ethics, is ridiculous. And that's what this would require to be true.
Doesn't it? Heretics during the 12th century were put to death, so the church certainly didn't approve of teaching unaltered Aristotelian philosophy. Thomas Aquinas, most notably, recognized value in Aristotle and
now we're getting somewhere.
Worked to reconcile Aristotle's work with Christian theology, modifying what he could, and eventually helped convince the church that they were compatible. After that, Greek philosophy was allowed to be taught at universities and became standard. This did not happen as quickly as it would today.
I believe that Platonism was taught before that. Platonism was a large part of Christian education in the East. I'd have to learn a little bit more about this. David Bentley Hart, he's a classicist. He's done quite a bit on this. He's a good read. I should put a few other people on as recommendations for this.
Material back then was very time-consuming and expensive to create. As we trace back the roots of what we call Western civilization today, however, we would be remiss to claim that we only took the good and left the bad. Unfortunately, Aristotle used his ideas about natural law to justify slavery, and Thomas Aquinas found validity in those ideas, preserving them in the Christian tradition, which wasn't difficult to do with...
Ooh. So you mean the scientific Aristotle? Oh, he argued for slavery, but he was the first scientist. Does that mean that now science owns slavery? Well, of course it doesn't, right? Because slavery is bad and science is good, and if it's a bad thing, then it can't be part of our values. I mean, this is...
So again, we have the mind of a simpleton, where a person must be all good or all bad, where somebody can't have some aspects about their personality and contributions that are good, while others that are bad. You either have to be totally good or totally evil, and this is the mind of a simpleton. Notice that, look at the screen. I actually provide evidence of support for slavery within the actual doctrine. Okay, when we go back and look at Aristotle, we can examine his claims about slavery, about the nature of human beings, about the subservience of foreigners, right? We can examine those claims and test them and find them invalid. We're free and open to do that in science. But with religious doctrine, it's different. You're compelled to believe the doctrine. You're compelled to accept the doctrine. You can't just take Matthew 18:25 and scribble it out and delete it. You can't do that. You can't take Exodus chapter 21 verses 2 through 5 and say, oh well, let's just forget about that. Okay? No, that's a permanent part of your religion. These things have meanings, sir.
This is the difficulty, right? And this is sort of the trick you do in progressive history and in Marxist history generally, right? You retroactively identify what's good, and then you make your group the set of all people who believed good things. Now, this is very dangerous because it creates,
That's not what I'm doing at all. I'm a modern day person who has the benefit of being able to look at history and being able to see what was good and what was bad. I have the benefit of the tale of history, of the things that happened, the things that resulted. We can learn from that. I'm not saying that it was my group that got it right all the time. I'm not claiming Aristotle as one of my own. I'm saying this was a good aspect about Aristotle and this was a bad aspect about Aristotle. I'm not saying that this guy was ours and he was all good and, or that our people accepted all the good things and rejected all the bad things. That's not what I'm doing at all. As it is constantly trotted in front of my face, Stalin was an atheist, or Mao and Pol Pot. And do you think that I deny the atrocities that they committed? Of course not. This, again, is just a straw man. This is a ridiculous caricature that he can beat down because he can't, either he doesn't know how to beat down the real thing. He's totally, I suspect that he's totally ignorant of what my actual points are. The bottom line is that he's not actually arguing against the things that I actually believe.
It creates, if I'm a Christian, right, I identify as a Christian or a Catholic. I have to own the fact that my group did some shitty things to people.
You see, I just fucking did that with Stalin, Mao, and Pol Pot. Now, I don't feel responsible at all for the things that they did because we all just so happen to not believe in a God. I'm not responsible for them. There's plenty of people who do apply that kind of guilt by association. I'm not one of those people, but there are those people who exist, and yes, they are insufferable. I'm not blaming you for any of the faults of, what the Catholic Church did. I'm not blaming you for burning people at the stake. Maybe you think I am. I don't know. But let's go on and listen to you make the same point that I just made, because you don't realize that we're actually in agreement about a lot of the things that you think that you're arguing with me against, and the things that you actually have a problem with are the things that a fellow Christian has argued that I'm actually arguing against. But again, this problem wouldn't exist if you actually had done your research.
Now, I can and I do believe to a certain extent that Catholicism did the best it could with the times it was given, and despite the fact that there were numerous really, really evil popes and numerous really, really evil Catholics, that overall the church was a force of good. I have to believe that. But if you're like dark matter, the us of the our values is just every person who believed in good things. So
obviously, that's not true. That should be very obvious to anybody who knows anything about my work.
If you look through history, everyone who was oppressed and everyone who did good things is part of your group. I'm part of the group of people who were oppressed and only wanted to do good, but we couldn't do good because we were being oppressed. That view of history, and it's encouraged by Marxism, and it's the most dangerous thing about Marxism. It essentially means you never have to be sorry. You never have to be sorry because your philosophy is the one that weaves itself throughout history and is responsible for all of the good things and none of the bad things. And
Okay, so this is interesting. So this guy is a type of person that would apply guilt by association. He thinks that you do have to be sorry for the things that people in the past who happen to believe in something that you believe in, that you are responsible for the things that they did. I that's kind of surprising. So this guy, um, I guess he does have more in common with these so-called SJWs who believe in guilt by association, generational guilt. Um, wow. Okay, that's surprising.
And so you must be one of the good people. You never have to own anything. This is really, really dangerous. And if you're going to be part of some collective R or us, you better be part of something that actually owns up to when you made a mistake. Now, Aristotle thought slavery was permitted. Thomas Aquinas thought slavery was permitted. I tend to think that there's caveats that explain this, that explain the mistake away. I think it's a mistake. It's part of history. It's part of my history. I have to own it. If you're
No, you don't. You are not responsible for the things that Thomas Aquinas believed and said and did. Okay? I'm letting you off the hook. You don't have to you don't have to pretend that you supported slavery. Okay? You reject slavery. We can all give you credit for rejecting slavery. How about that?
a Marxist, you never have to own anything.
Tacit approval in the form of rules for the practice coming from both the Old and New Testaments. Approval of slavery eventually became a blight on the rise of America. So while many American values, including the structure of our government, were inspired by ancient Greece and Rome,
$10 says this guy does not mention Christian abolitionists.
Oh, okay. This guy finally got something right. Yeah, I didn't mention the Christian abolitionists. You got yourself, $10, whatever. Yeah. There's all these verses in your holy books that promote slavery and slavery, went on and on all throughout human history, and your holy books contributed to that. But yeah, in the 11th hour, towards modernity, there were some Christians who fought against that. Yeah, good on them. I'm sorry I didn't mention them. I'm too busy complaining about slavery and how your fucking religion perpetuated it. But God forbid I don't mention the fact that there were people who believed in Christianity when pretty much everyone else believed in Christianity who fought against it. Okay, I'm sorry.
Abolitionists.
for the betterment of society, we absolutely had to have the will to override some of those values, like the approval of slavery. Let us also not forget that the ancient Greeks and Romans persecuted atheists as well.
Okay, now it's prediction time. Now, remember earlier he was making it seem as though I thought that the ancient, I believe the words he used was atheist utopia, that I believed that ancient Greece was some ancient atheist utopia, right? That's what he said. Now, is he going to correct himself and apologize and say, no, okay, he's clarified himself. He didn't actually believe this. I was wrong. Is he going to say that? I predict no. I predict he's not going to revisit this. Let's see if I'm right.
Not that anyone from their era...
Oh my god, you mean that they were part of the oppressor class too? But I thought they came up with all the good knowledge. I guess the good people who invented the knowledge weren't the people oppressing the atheists because they were good oppressed people.
Of course not. Of course he couldn't admit that he was wrong, right? He's going on with his simpleton all people are either fit into the category of good or people fit into the category of bad. They can't do both. A person can't do both good and bad. They either have to be good or bad. He's doing that old shtick. He's not going to go back and correct himself. He said that I thought that ancient Greece was an atheist utopia, right? He's forgotten about. He made that point. That was ticked off in his favor. His audience ticked that off in his favor, and then he moved on. And now that the correction is coming, and now that he's actually having to listen to my actual beliefs and not strawman me, Now he turns it around and is making fun. Oh, well, I guess it was only the good people that did the good things and the bad people that did the bad things, which is something else I don't believe at all. But he has to make this ridiculous representation of me because he can't actually refute what I truly believe, and that people are capable of doing both good and bad. There are atheists who do good things and bad things in their lives. There are Christians who do good things and bad things in their lives. And I, being the nuanced person that I am quite capable of pointing out both. I'm quite capable of finding merit in Aristotle and guilt. Imagine that.
Was quick to volunteer their thoughts about the non-existence of deities. No, the charge of atheism was more commonly used as an accusation to rid oneself of their enemies. The ultimate irony is that early Christians were killed under the charge of atheism for rejecting the existence and power of the state-sponsored gods of Rome, which is another unfortunate disease that...
Does that make them part of the oppressive class? Obviously it doesn't. This is...
What are you talking about? Obviously it does. Christians were the oppressed group at that time. There's no doubt about it. What are you talking about? Why do you think that my position is that the Christians weren't oppressed? That's ludicrous. I literally just said that they were oppressed. What is wrong with this man?
This is even more ridiculous, right? Now, because Christians were being oppressed and they did good things, they become part of the us category. I'm sure he's going to bring up Galileo too. I mean, maybe he doesn't, but if he does, Galileo was a Catholic. He was devout. He encouraged his children to join the sisterhood. His portrayal as an atheist in history is completely backcasting. But again, if you curve your ideology, the history here is being formed by ideology. We're not accepting any nuance because we're not trying to get nuance. We're trying to get an oppression narrative.
So, Mr. People only do good things or people only do bad things is talking about nuance now. Ludicrous. He thinks that I'm claiming Christians as my own because they were oppressed. He thinks that I don't realize that Galileo was a Christian. Like a Christian cannot be oppressed by his fellow Christians because of the things that he says and believes that happen to go against the grain of what some other Christians say and believe. What are you talking about? That's ridiculous.
Carried over into Christianity, the persecution of atheists and the toxic mingling of government and religion.
Oh, it's like toxic masculinity.
It's as I suspect with this guy. Certain words cause a Pavlovian response in him. He's heard the word toxic used in certain contexts so many times. He hates feminists, and feminists use words like toxic masculinity. So when he hears someone else use the word toxic, that word gets tainted with all this baggage. He doesn't actually listen to the things I say. That word can't be used anymore because it causes a Pavlovian response in him. So if I were to actually sit down and talk with this guy, I would be very careful about my language, almost like you would with somebody who gets hyper offended at things. Ironically, this guy is, the SJW that he complains about. I'd be very careful about my language around this man. Not because I'd be worried about offending him, but because I don't want him to start, just putting up barriers. Like, that's the mind of a simpleton. They hear a word and a barrier goes up, and then they have to ignore the point because of what they think I'm saying rather than what I'm actually saying. Don't fall into that trap.
Thing the founding fathers of America were at least wise enough to reject from the very beginning, thereby working against nearly half of the 10 Commandments.
Oh, good Lord. Oh, God, this is really plebs here. I don't even want to refute this. I mean, if you think that founding fathers were all secular atheists of the freedom from religion...
Absolutely ludicrous. I never said such a thing. It's ridiculous for you to infer that from what I said.
...variety, you need to read more.
The most unique and foremost of our values, those that protect our freedom of speech, religion, press, and assembly, are absent throughout the vast majority of a Christian history that often enforced the very opposite of our values as Americans.
Oh, we don't have modern values in ancient times?
You colossal fucking idiot. I'm talking about the actual crux of the argument in which this video is taking place. The argument being, the origin of our values as Americans, of our values as part of Western civilization. And what's integral to that is freedom of speech, religion, press, and assembly. And I'm saying that no, these were not values promoted in Christianity. And you are taking the crux of the argument and turning it around. You're agreeing with it, mind you. And you're turning it around and making it a joke, like, oh my God, we didn't have these values in ancient times. No, because that's not where they came from, like people are claiming. People are claiming that our values are Christian. They're not. You're agreeing that they're not, and you're making fun of me while you agree with me. You fucking moron. Get your head out of your ass.
So, a couple hundred years before the scientific revolution, we have ancient Greek knowledge being widely disseminated into the universities. While universities did evolve from theological studies, their utility wasn't realized by the secular world until the recovery of Greek philosophy.
Wasn't realized by the secular world? Where was the secular world in 1300?
Nowhere! That's the point. It came later.
Who is he talking about? The secular world? Does he mean everyone who wasn't literally part of the church? But they were all devout Christians. I don't know. There's only 20 more minutes of this. Oh my God, this gets better, chat. Right? I don't want to.
Not until that secular utilitarianism did we start to see rapid progress. It's important to note that there have been geniuses all throughout history within Christianity and beyond. So why could none of them accomplish what the geniuses of the scientific revolution did? Notice that a component of science has still been missing from history up until this point, a component that David did not mention at all: the widespread cooperation and eventual peer review of other scientists. While the term peer review didn't exist until the 20th century, its vital precursor goes back to the exact era of the scientific revolution. We'll see, however, before people could easily study each other's work, geniuses were often separated by hundreds of years and hundreds of miles. So did something happen during that time and place to solve that problem? Yes. The printing press was invented in Europe during the 15th century. After that, books and other mass publications, including new scientific discoveries, weren't so expensive and time-consuming to translate, create, and disseminate. That facility.
Why was this contradicts the whole thing? Why was the printing press invented if there wasn't a scientific revolution already going on? And if cooperation among a large group of people was the only requirement, I got one word for you: China.
Imbecile. Who said it was the only requirement? This is just the beginning. You said yourself, there's 20 minutes. You're complaining about how much time is left in the video. This is a part of the argument. Obviously, I'm not going to go on about the printing press for 20 more minutes. There's obviously more to it than the printing press. I'm saying that the printing press was a vital component that facilitated the scientific revolution. It's part of the point. It's not the whole point. This is what I'm taught. This is why I keep calling this guy a simpleton, because it's all or nothing with this guy. It's always all or nothing.
Oh, I got a better word for you. How about the Empire of the Golden Frickin' Horde? How about Kublai Khan? I mean, Kublai Khan had all the thinkers essentially shipped into one central city, and he produced absolutely nothing in terms of any kind of scientific endeavor. Okay, I don't know. Should I read any of the comments here?
A vast network of geniuses working together, all studying and building off of each other's work relatively quickly like never before. It was like the old world's internet.
He has the turkey in this thing. I'm not so sure how much communication there would have been in that front. And wouldn't that have made the Turkey the most likely location for the scientific revolution? They're the most military powerful.
David totally ignores this crucial factor and instead argues that no, it was a widely established ancient cultural norm that did something it had never done before by suddenly simultaneously causing scientists who just so happened to live in the same time and place where the printing press was invented to spark the scientific revolution. Again, David's argument is,
why didn't Aristotle invent the printing press, man? Why didn't the Greeks invent the printing press?
Why didn't Aristotle invent the printing press? Why didn't the Greeks invent the printing press? What are you talking about? I'm not. I don't. God, this guy is so simple. It's not me giving credit to all one specific area or another. There's nuance. Okay, there's a lot of different reasons for a historical event. Okay, sometimes there's not that many. Sometimes there's a huge number of different reasons that were contributing factors. And what I'm doing right now is I'm going through and examining all of these different factors that had an effect on the event. And the Greeks were one aspect, and a completely separate aspect of that was the printing press. It wasn't the end-all be-all. It wasn't the only reason. So far, I have established Greece as one of those reasons. And now I'm getting into the printing press as another part of that reason. So you're having trouble because you are the type of person that imagines things as being an all or none type of scenario. Totally good or totally evil or totally helpful or totally harmful. And I'm not that way. Ironically, I'm the one who's being nuanced here, and you're the one who's being the fucking idiot simpleton.
If it was just static since 180.
The one that's based on luck, not mine. It's true that the initial viability of the printing press was due to the demand for Bibles, as such a thing would be in high demand during the brutal reign of the church. But that's a mere credit of logistics, and not a matter of credit for anything philosophical or scientific.
No, because Romans and
Furthermore,
Greeks didn't have
this
a need to
was a
circulate
period when
books.
explorers were leaving Europe on voyages all over the world for the first time, leading to many discoveries of other cultures and ideas. And when they returned to Europe, they brought knowledge of those cultures and ideas with them. David seems to think that Europe existed in a vacuum during the 15th and 16th centuries, but that is very much not the case. He ironically blames the rest of the world for being ignorant, when in actuality the rest of the world's ideas were converging in Europe at that time and inspiring people in new ways, including contemporary Greek scientists.
I'm just stopping here to note that I don't actually understand what he's saying when he talks at the same time I do. So that's why I'm not refuting what he says, is because I can't hear him. I don't understand what he's saying. So let's move on.
Scholars, artists, and philosophers who were fleeing into Europe as refugees after the Ottoman invasion of Constantinople.
Okay, so here's another point that I made where earlier he criticized me for not considering this, when in actuality later in the video I actually do consider this. Now, let's see if he remembers that he made that point, and let's see if he now retracts it and say, oh, okay, this guy does consider that. How much money do you want to fucking bet that this guy doesn't do that?
Many historians believe this also played an important role in the rise of Renaissance humanism. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I want to emphasize the importance of ancient Greek influence. As it just so happens, history...
Okay, so it seems like he's not going to do that. Just like, everybody watching this thought, you're right. He didn't go back and correct himself. He took that off as a point in his favor, and he's just going to go ahead and fucking leave it as a point ticked off in his favor, either because he doesn't remember that he made that point, or he's being intellectually dishonest. My guess is that he just doesn't remember that he made that point, and, he's being an airhead. And I did hear him say, oh, you mean those Greeks who oppressed atheists. Yes, yes. It is possible for me to acknowledge a group that oppressed atheists, yet also became the foundation of our civilization. Imagine that. Isn't that remarkable?
Provides us with a brilliant visual representation of the Greek influence on thought during that time, despite the brutal hold Christianity held upon people back then.
Okay, I'm gonna pause it here. This is painful. I mean, at some point, I don't think we need to. This is just it's just basically SJW history, right? Like, oh, we got all of these discoveries from China and Africa, and I don't know. I mean, there's no evidence for any of this.
What is this? SJW history? What are you talking about? Of course, this is just more red meat for his audience. You know, they need that word SJW, you know, so that they can know that they're supposed to disagree with this. They're supposed to hate this. This isn't a refutation, you know, just saying something is SJW history, you know, to dismiss it, an age of exploration. That's fucking ridiculous. And you know, and he says that I'm painful. Astounding.
Yeah. So I paused the video when I had something clever to say, but if I'm just complaining because it's all the same, I don't know. I have to get through 20 more minutes of this POS, so bear with me. I apologize for being a little more salty here than I usually am.
Science have always had a special relationship, borrowing from each other and inspiring each other. Just before the scientific revolution, which marked a huge shift in science, there was the Renaissance, which marked a huge shift in art. Again, this was no coincidence. So what inspired this sudden shift in art? The rediscovery of ancient Greek civilization, of course. Why is this significant? Because the art of ancient Greece and Rome was actually far more advanced than medieval art, which came many hundreds of years later. We people of modernity aren't accustomed to the past being more advanced than the future, but in many...
Oh, we aren't? Oh my God, Dark Matter 2525. Go into a cotton-picking modern art gallery. Take the first picture off the wall you see that's a splatter blob of menstrual blood, and hold that up to a Rococo painting of the Last Supper. And you ask me if modern people can't understand a decline in artistic quality over a few hundred years.
Okay, so this pretty much confirms what I said earlier about this guy being sheltered, right? Most of modern art is incredibly beautiful, and a lot of it, if not most of it, is also based in realism. And even the artwork that is stylistic is also beautiful and has very discernible features that aren't just, you know, abstract. But he's ignorant of that. He is cherry picking. You know, he's pointing to some red splotch of period blood, as he calls it. Like, is there any famous artwork that we can think of that's a red splotch of period blood? What is the Last Supper of period blood? Like, there isn't one. We don't revere those works of art in that way. That's a very niche thing. That's not the norm. Okay. Yes, there's some elitism going on there. Yes, there's some insufferable douchebags in the art world. We get that. Okay, but you can't take them and say that this is what you are. This is what has become of the art world. There's much more to the art world today that this guy is ignorant about. Maybe he's like me and he did study the Hellenistic period and Baroque, and maybe he knows all about the Renaissance and the Impressionists later on and Dadaism, and maybe he'd studied all that. You know, I studied art history. I know all about the history, okay? But I also keep in touch with what's going on today. And there's brilliant artists. There's famous artists. There's artists who are millionaires who make beautiful artwork. But this guy's ignorant about that. He knows about the period blood because he watches the red meat anti-SJW videos on YouTube that focus on the period blood. So that occupies a big space in his life because he exposes himself to garbage. So he kind of extrapolates that upon the rest of the world, and he thinks that the rest of the world is filled with garbage when it's not. Expose yourself to beauty. Go out there and look for it. Stop looking for garbage.
Quality over a few hundred years. We have destroyed our artistic ability to produce anything of beauty. And that has nothing to do with any kind of scientific advancement. Now, this is... I'm getting way too salty. I said menstrual blood painting. That actually isn't an exaggeration. I actually saw one of those in a modern art gallery. So I shouldn't... It wasn't meant to be disparaging of... well, actually, it was meant to be disparaging of modern art, but it wasn't meant to be an exaggeration or some kind of misogynistic put down. But at any rate...
Okay, so now I have to practice what I preach and take back what I said. No, he isn't just getting his period blood thing from YouTube videos that he watched. He actually went to an art gallery and saw it once, okay? I was mistaken. I made a false assumption. I apologize. But again, you can't go to an art gallery and see a piece of artwork that you don't like and then extrapolate that on the rest of the modern art world. You're a little better off than I thought you were, but you're still making the same mistake, essentially.
Decline. Okay, so people who actually look at late Roman Empire art understand that there was a huge decline between the early Augustinian period, Octavian period of Roman art and the later Diocletian period. You can see a steep decline. Now, the art produced in the medieval period was largely produced by people who weren't Roman, who weren't actually descendant from the culture we're depicting here. And the art wasn't actually markedly different than the kind of art you'd see coming out of the late Roman Empire.
Aspects of Christianity's brutal reign, that was exactly the case. When you look at ancient Greek art, a tradition that was carried on in ancient Rome as well, you see art that was created using methodology that David falsely accredits to Christianity. This is why Christian medieval art was not realistic, but Greek and Roman art was.
Again, two different periods and two different people. I believe that piece of art comes from Germany or France. People who would have...
Now, notice that he didn't... It seems as though he didn't actually even listen to the point that I was making. Yeah, I know it was two different groups of people. That's the point. I mean, you have a group that is looking to the natural world. This is the point that I'm making. You can see in their artwork that they're referencing the natural world, right? In this group of people. The objective isn't to link these two groups of people. The objective is to show the differences. Now, in the other group, you can see that they were not referencing the natural world. They weren't looking to the natural world. And that's integral to my point about Christianity and the claims of David Wood crediting Christianity with being the ones who decided that they needed to look to the natural world, right? I'm saying no, that came from the Greeks, and the artwork bears that out. The artwork is actually a visual representation. See, that's the point I'm making. And this guy, I don't even know if he heard me. He totally glosses over it, and he thinks that, he's refuting me by offering an explanation as to why the artwork is different, because it's two different groups of people. Yeah, I understand. It's two different groups of people. That's part of the point. The point is I'm giving credit to this group and not to that group. Okay?
These were, people don't understand, there was a huge population shift in Europe during the fall of the Roman Empire, after which barbarians that flooded out of basically Germany settled throughout the Roman Empire. These people would have had no contact with earlier forms of Roman art, so it would be like expecting people from Africa to essentially recreate the art of of again, the Baroque period, because they happen to be imported from Somalia into Germany. And
so, yeah, he is obviously misunderstanding the point. I'm talking about a culture that, the Renaissance didn't happen until long after the fall of Rome. They had more than enough time to start looking to the natural world again and start creating realistic artwork again. Indeed, especially if that is what Christianity encouraged. But that didn't happen until the reintroduction of Greek culture. And my whole point is that that's not a coincidence. And this guy is just totally ignoring that.
And became German. This is, again, it's ignorance of what actually was going on during this period.
Because not only did the Greeks value the natural world, but they knew how to reference it. That was hundreds of years before Christianity, so Christianity cannot be credited with that way of thinking. David's argument was defeated around 2,500 years before he ever uttered it. Look at the artwork.
So notice he's totally silent. This is the crux of this part of my argument. This is the part that he needs to be refuting, and he sits there in silence because he knows that this is correct. This is true. But he never listens to David's argument. He doesn't understand that. Let's just move on. Let's move on.
Christian world was producing during the medieval period, from the 5th century, not long after Christianity gained dominance.
Those Byzantine frescoes would not have been markedly different than their ancient equivalents in terms of realism.
To the 15th century, the century that marks the beginning of the cracks in its foundation. What we have here is 1,000 years of slowed progress, a period during the height of Christian power and influence when scientific, philosophical, technological, and artistic advancements were relatively few and far between.
Oh, by the way, this cover right here, this is from the Book of Kells, which is one of the most beautifully illustrated manuscripts. You won't find a single thing like it in Roman times.
So it is clear at this point, when he's saying this is beautiful, that he's not understanding my point. The beauty there's a large subjective component to beauty. Like, I can completely understand why somebody would think that this is beautiful. The point is not what is or is not beautiful. The point is what is or is not realistic, because the point is who was referencing the real world. I can think of a great many artworks that are incredibly realistic, but they're not beautiful. And I can think of very many artworks that are not realistic and they're incredibly beautiful. So notice how he is subtly shifting the burden here. The burden is not what is beautiful. The burden is who was referencing the real world. Because Christianity, in David Wood's argument, is the thing that is given credit for this idea of referencing reality in order to gain knowledge. And I'm saying, look at the artwork. Who was referencing reality to gain knowledge? Obviously, it was the Greeks and not the people of the medieval era.
And it's not even clear that the technology of this would have existed in Roman times. So the guy isn't even inconsistent. I mean, he's taking this and he's thinking, okay, I'm going to hold this up here and I'm going to hope my audience is ignorant enough to not know that this is a beautifully illustrated manuscript, something that would not have existed anywhere in the Roman scroll art. And I'm going to hope that you don't understand that what I'm showing you is a magnificent work of art.
And the irony here is that he thinks that I'm denying the beauty of this and saying that, oh, look at this trash. Obviously that, these people were garbage. No, what I'm saying is that they weren't referencing the real world like the Greeks were, right? It's not about beauty. I already went through this, but he's accusing me of ignorance when actually he's the one who's ignorant of the point that I'm trying to make here. He didn't actually listen to me.
I'm going to hope that you're just going to see this and look at, Jesus with a mullet and think, oh, look at these cartoonishly ignorant medieval people, and then I'm going to compare it to a statue. I mean, people have been seeing statues as they would have existed in the Greek time. They were painted, and they were painted with faces that looked more or less like this.
They did occur, of course, and we have religion to thank for preserving literacy during that time, but it wasn't anything like the rapidly improving world following that period, spurred on during the Renaissance, after the rediscovery of ancient Greece. Look at the artwork. Look at where our...
Yeah, a good comment in the chat, too. No architecture examples, right? That would have been a good comparison.
Okay, again, this exemplifies a profound misunderstanding of the argument. You know, architecture. There's no denying that there was beautiful architecture. But that's not relevant to my point about referencing the real world. Now, the way you can recognize that I'm actually making a legitimate point and they're not is because their standard is largely subjective, and that standard is beauty. You know, compare a flying buttress to a Corinthian column. You know, which is more beautiful? Well, that's largely subjective. That's in the eye of the beholder, right? But if you apply a standard like what I have, like which is more realistic, that has a more objective answer. So if we compare a medieval art to an ancient Greek art, we can compare them and see that there's a difference in realism there. It's not like taking, you know, a Corinthian column and a flying buttress and saying which is more beautiful. You see, their standard is subjective. My standard is objective. I'm actually making a point, and they're being self-congratulatory hacks.
Comparison.
Our minds were. Unlike the Greeks and Romans, the Christians were not looking to the natural world for reference, as David claims. They were looking inward to their flawed imaginations. They were obsessed with fantasy realms like heaven and hell, and they ignored the natural world. This is clearly reflected in the primitive, childish, two-dimensional, badly proportioned...
Oh my God. They didn't look to the nature for this
artwork that followed the far more advanced artwork.
So there he actually acknowledges the point. He just dismisses it, though. He doesn't like, he repeats it, right? But he doesn't pause the video and make any points about it because I'm right. Isn't that interesting? He goes on and on like I'm making a point that I'm not actually making. He'll attack that all day. He'll attack a straw man all day. But then when he finally, you know, when he's actually listening for a change and he actually hears my words, all he does, his rebuttal is to repeat them and then just let it go. Very telling, very telling.
Of ancient Greece.
Paintings to statues, ladies and gentlemen.
In Rome, fallen and swept into the dust.
I did a lot of artwork in college. I did a lot of paintings, and I did sculptures too. And as most artists can attest, talent and skill transcends medium. Look at Michelangelo, for instance. If you're a good sculptor, chances are that's going to translate into painting as well. You're going to have to learn the fundamentals of the medium, but once you have a grasp on the technicalities of the medium, your artistic skill is going to translate. It doesn't matter if we're talking about paintings or sculptures. If you have artistic ability, if you have, and I'm not even talking about actually art. I mean, I am to a degree, but what I'm talking about is the technique of looking to the real world as a reference. If you're doing that in sculpture and you're good at sculpture, and you do that in painting and you're good at painting, you're going to, it's going to be clear what you're doing. It's going to be obvious. So again, we have this mistake of thinking that I'm being mistaken in comparing sculptures to paintings. I'm not. You can paint realistically. You can sculpt realistically. And an artist's ability is going to transcend medium. Much like a musician. Think of a musician who can play the guitar really well. Chances are, if you teach them how to play the piano, they're going to pick it up and be able to play music, much more quickly than somebody who's never touched any musical instrument whatsoever before in their life.
It's been of history.
The reason why he's not using paintings for comparison is because a lot of the Greek paintings were two-dimensional and misproportioned as well.
Christian authoritarianism resulted in...
No, that's not true at all. The simple fact is that a lot of paintings didn't survive the fall of Rome. Statues naturally fared better, but because of the medium, the nature of the medium. But you could look at the sculptures of the medieval period for comparison if you want to be a pedant about it, and look at how terrible those were. Find me some comparable sculptures from the medieval period. I mean, you're going to see things like gargoyles and stuff, which are pretty cool, but guess what? That's not referencing reality. That's a fantasy, okay? The sculptures of people from the medieval period, those are pretty bad too.
The censorship and desecration of Greek and Roman statues. They destroyed history because it was contrary to Scripture and their sensitivities, thus prohibiting progress.
What the hell is he talking about? This is totally... the idea that there was this huge purging of pagan statues, I didn't even list the reason. I guess it's because Christians just hate progress.
Okay, so at this point, this guy is actually denying that iconoclasm occurred. I don't know what to say. I mean, there's nothing you can say to that. He doesn't believe in iconoclasm. Okay. Okay. I mean, are you a flat earther too? Are you a moon hoaxer? I mean, at this point, nothing would surprise me.
When Christianity has unchecked power over government, the results are always Orwellian. When does this period of ignorance end? Not until the Renaissance do you see a lot of history finally picking up where it left off 1,000 years beforehand.
All of these paintings were done either under the monarchies in France or under the northern Italian city-states like Florence or Milan. Does he think that Christianity did not have unfettered reign over these governments?
That's actually integral to my point, that they had unfettered reign over these governments, that they commissioned a lot of this artwork, that a lot of this artwork has religious themes. I acknowledge that.
The visual cue of this manifests in the adoption of Greco-Roman artistic methodology. You can clearly see the change in the artwork, which was quickly followed by the change in the science. Not a coincidence. This was the birth of the Renaissance humanists, when people started looking at the natural world again for reference.
Oh, but suddenly pictures of goddesses and angels, that's historic. They were, the way they painted this painting, they went outside and looked at the east wind, and they saw that the east wind was actually, these angels blowing onto giant clam cells.
Okay, so again, this guy doesn't understand the argument. It's not, I acknowledge that they're still painting fantastical things, but the things that aren't fantastical, like the people, right? Do you notice a difference in the way the people are being depicted? And in this case that's on the screen right now, it's, not a perfect example. Aphrodite there isn't, as well proportioned as, you would see in a lot of later artwork and modern artwork, but it's still head and shoulders above what was going on in the medieval period. You're noticing the fact that people were studying anatomy, right? That's clear. There's a clear shift in our knowledge of anatomy, at least amongst the artists. Like the artists of the medieval period, they clearly had issues with anatomy, right? But now we're starting to look at the natural world. That's my point. We're starting to look at the natural world. And by natural world, I'm talking about things like anatomy. So yeah, they did fantastical things, right? Like this, but the people in them were the common denominator. And you can see the clear difference there.
The only way they could have painted with this is looking at nature.
Causing a resurgence of...
I'm sorry, guys. Like, I know I'm being really uncharacteristically salty and sarcastic. It's not usually my style.
Notice how, again, it's with him, it's all or nothing. You know, like, and he projects that onto me. Like he says, the only way they could have achieved this is by looking at nature. You see the way he projects?
But I don't know. I got like 10 requests to do this video, but it just poor fact after poor fact after poor fact after poor fact.
I don't know what he means by poor facts. A fact is a fact. It's neither poor nor good. If you mean falsehoods, then no, they're not falsehoods. Refute them. But you don't even really understand my argument. So, I mean, you're refuting all the wrong things. And there's things that we agree with that you actually refute. And there's things that I'm arguing against that you also would argue against, but you misplace those arguments on, like I'm the one making them when I'm not. It's maddening.
Realism. David thanks Christianity for this shift in thought, but it's evident that Christianity inspired the exact opposite. For over 1,000 years, inspired people to look to the spiritual world, a make-believe world, for
Oh yeah, battles. That was part of the spiritual world.
knowledge, which is precisely why we did not advance like we did until we gained from classical antiquity a renewed appreciation
Dark matter hasn't shown a single pagan painting or fresco. It's all been paintings compared to sculptures. That's it.
for the natural world, the real world, not the spiritual world. And that is what finally ushered in real progress. Think about all that damage religion has done to our basic progress. The next time you want to ask atheists why they talk about God so much. Sure, much of the artwork back then was biblically based, but that was the sanctioned story of the time, and the church was the main entity with the money to commission such work. So that's...
Oh, I just got a super chat from Joe Lohangram. What is your favorite painter? Mine is John William Waterhouse. Oh, he's pretty good. I'm well, okay, as you probably got from my outro music, I'm a big fan of the Flemish masters, Bruegel and...
So as he goes on this little tangent, notice that I acknowledged the fantastical nature of the Renaissance artwork as well, right? Which was a point that he made earlier, but since he never watched my video fully before actually responding to it, he didn't know that I was actually going to get into that. So he keeps preempting the points that I make. You know, as he goes on this little tangent with his super chat, this is never going to be acknowledged by him, right? I mean, this was a point that he just made. And here I am answering that point in real time. Like, it might as well be real time, right? But now we're going to go on a tangent, and he's going to totally forget about it. Not that he would acknowledge it anyway, but it's just going to be ticked off as another point in his favor, just like all the others. And it's going to be conveniently forgotten and never revisited.
Other people like that, they're just really, I really, something very evocative about them. You know, I even really like the Impressionists, like Monet. People say, oh, that was the beginning of the decline of Western art. There's some truth to that. You know, people got tired of the form; they started going to subjectivism, but it's still very profoundly beautiful, and it communicates something spiritual. I probably, you know, this is a really good question. I probably should do a video sometime going over art and art history. One piece of advice, though, if people are interested in studying history in college, don't take history classes. Take art history classes, because it's much more useful if you base your understanding of history on physical objects.
And, you know, he's right about this. I took a lot of art history in college. And the thing that, the reason he's saying study art history is the very thing that I'm doing in my video. I'm using artwork. I'm using the actual artifacts of these different eras to illustrate a point. And he totally disregards that. Maybe it's because he's, you know, prejudiced against atheists or something. I don't know. He doesn't want to acknowledge, like, This, like, I'm literally doing the thing that he's suggesting other people do. Like, I'm using this as a rhetorical device in the very video that he's criticizing. And he's telling people, hey, guys, do this thing. Isn't dark matter an idiot? Isn't he an idiot? Oh, by the way, guys, hey, everyone should do this thing that dark matter's doing. The level of self-awareness, the lack of self-awareness here is astounding.
To me, I learned more history from an art history class than I ever learned from a class, like actual history classes where they just go through names and dates.
Again, a matter of logistics or even indoctrination. We saw the same subject matter during the medieval period, but clearly their techniques, their very way of thinking, changed. And that was definitely not thanks to Christianity, because for 1,500 years, Christianity had its chance. But what about what the scientists of that time actually said? Those damning quotes professing God to be the reason for their inspiration. It would be quite a shocking historical incongruity if they were anything other than Christian. Consider the context of that period. This was the beginning of modern scientific knowledge, before they had very many answers. As I said, after we gained a respectable amount of answers, scientists naturally shifted to atheism. That's because the answers didn't point to God the way everyone...
A respectable number of answers. I guess we got across that 2.5 niism scale, right? And we got a sufficient number.
Everyone thought they would. 16th century scientists lived hundreds of years before Darwin, before there was a significantly exhaustive, most highly confirmed theory in science that explains in great detail exactly how human beings came to exist. Before that, we didn't know, and the deliberate design of our bodies seemed perfectly plausible. Putting all that aside, those scientists lived during a time when heretics were put to death. Because of the
most of the people here that he illustrates were independent contributors to theology. I'm thinking of...
So again, this is him being ignorant. Like the reason I'm presenting these specific people were because it was these specific people that David Wood presented. So I'm just adhering to David Wood's argument and I don't know what kind of point he's going to make against me, but I'm just establishing that I'm not the one who chose to include these people. David Wood was, his fellow Christian.
Theology. I'm thinking of Newton, I'm thinking of Descartes. These people took time out of their study to science to actually write about theology. So the idea that these people were being threatened into contributing to a theological perspective of the universe is bunk.
Okay, so here we can see that he's actually demonstrably wrong about that, even about the two people that he used as examples, like Newton and Descartes. Of course, they were religious, but just because you were religious and contributed to theological thought, that didn't mean you were safe from the church. Like Newton kept secret the fact that he was against the Trinity, and he kept it secret for good reason, because his contemporaries were burned at the stake for refuting the Trinity. And of course, Descartes accepted heliocentrism in his book, The World, I believe it's called, which he did not publish because he feared the church. So in the very two people that he provided as examples, we can clearly see that, yes, the church did threaten those people, even though they were theists. You see, that this is the problem with his absolutist type thinking again. He thinks it's, all this way or all that way. And that's just not the case. Christians also oppressed other Christians. I mean, what the fuck does he think that the whole Reformation was about, for instance?
Their discoveries, as history shows, those scientists walked on a razor's edge between Christian approval and heretical thought, the latter of which caused some of the very same scientists David boasts as devout Christians to be persecuted and censored by the church for wrongthink, as their scientific findings were deemed incompatible with Christian doctrine, no doubt retarding scientific progress. So yes, Without Christians,
Just think how many nighisms we lost. We could have been a whole 3 nighs ahead of where we are right now, guys. I mean, we could have been a whole 3 nighs greater and a whole 2 Sarkeesians less oppression if it hadn't been for Christianity.
at the helm, there are very good reasons to believe it would have happened much faster. So what damning quotes did David provide us with from those scientists of hundreds of years ago? Those who study the stars have God for a teacher. Tycho Brahe. Brahe was a Danish nobleman. Our piety
Independently wealthy.
is the deeper, the greater is our awareness of creation and its grandeur. Since we astronomers are priests of the highest God in regard to the book of nature, it befits us to be thoughtful, not of the glory of our minds, but rather, above all else, of the glory of God. Johannes Kepler. Kepler was the imperial mathematician to Rudolf II, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and his grandfather was Lord Mayor of Wilderstadt.
What does this say about anything? He's just going to list the titles off? They lived in Christian societies.
I see plainly that the certainty and truth of all knowledge depends uniquely on my awareness of the true God, to such an extent that I was incapable of perfect knowledge about anything else until I became aware of him. René Descartes. Descartes' father was a member of Parliament. There are 2 kinds of people one can call reasonable: those who serve God with all their heart because they know him, and those who seek him with all their heart because they do not know him. Blaise Pascal. Pascal's father was a judge and a member of the nobles of the robe.
What does this even mean? I mean, both these people were famous for their independent contributions to the...
Right, this guy, he's incapable of waiting for a point. Everything has to be, right now. Fast food. Give me my food right now. I don't want to wait. You see, I'm not saying that these people were famous because of, who their fathers were or that they were independently wealthy or whatever. I know that they made contributions to theology. I know that they made contributions to science, right? And his feeble mind right now is grasping for why. Why am I mentioning this? I need to know the point right now. Okay, well, let's see what he does when I actually make the point. It's most likely going to be another ridiculous straw man, but we'll see what happens.
Theology.
The vastness, beauty, and orderliness of heavenly bodies, the excellent structure of animals and plants, and other phenomena of nature justly induce an intelligent, unprejudiced observer to conclude a supreme, powerful, just, and good author. Robert Boyle. Boyle's father was the first Earl of Cork. Atheism.
Man, if dark matter was half as interested in the fascinating world that these people came from as he was in constructing impression narratives that could, identify him and his friends as part of the good people of history, I think you get a lot more edification out of this whole process. I mean, you look at people from the 18th century, from these ancient time periods.
Okay, so before we listen to this guy bloviate about me creating oppression narratives, he thinks that I am creating an oppression narrative by showing how these people were linked to the aristocracy. But it's actually the opposite of what I'm doing. I'm showing how it contributed to the suppression of these people. Not that they were oppressive towards others, but that they were in fact oppressed themselves. These were theists and they were scientists, and they were not allowed to freely practice science and let the data take them where it would. They weren't allowed to express their doubts about Christian doctrine. Not that they were atheists, but like if they didn't accept the Trinity, they weren't allowed to express that. Or if they believed that the earth revolved around the sun because that's where the scientific evidence led them, they weren't allowed to express that. I'm showing how these people were oppressed. Not that they were the oppressors, but that they were also the oppressed. Even though that they were theists, even though that they weren't part of my group. No, I'm not creating a my group versus their group oppression narrative. What you need to do is wait for me to speak and actually listen to my words and not just assume what I'm doing before I do it. And then when I don't do it, forget that you made that assumption and then just keep on, going on like you were correct all along when you're not.
You see people that overcame incredible hardships to study science, and it's really quite inspiring just to think about the kind of passion they used to pursue these things with. I don't know. It seems so much more interesting and so much... this just seems squalled. Every time you're hearing this, he's using this voice that makes it sound like he's just kind of like scowling under his breath at all of the people who ever did him wrong.
Is so senseless and odious to mankind that it has never had many professors. Isaac Newton. I actually have something to say about the content of this quote because of its incredible hypocrisy. Isaac Newton, you see, was secretly against the Trinity, yet dared not make his views public. His pride...
Okay, but it does not make you an atheist, and he...
What? Who the fuck even implied that makes him an atheist? This guy is so simple that he thinks that I'm saying that Isaac Newton was an atheist because he secretly rejected the Trinity? What? Dude, pull your fucking head out of your ass and stop being all or nothing. Like, you're an atheist, everything has to be atheist. Well, you're a Christian, everything has to be Christian. No. But what this does do, mind you, is prove that there was some hardcore censorship going on. This does prove that there was some oppression going on. And no, it wasn't just against atheists. It was against other Christians as well. You acknowledge this, right? You did earlier. You said that the Catholic Church did some shady shit, and you acknowledge that. Well, here I am talking about some shady shit that the Catholic Church did, and here you are saying that I'm implying that Newton was an atheist? That's not the answer, idiot.
He did write about this. He just didn't publish them widely. So if he had been an atheist, he would have said, I'm an actual secret atheist.
Bear in mind that he's actually saying these words after I said, and I quote, "It would be a shocking historical incongruity if they were anything other than Christians." I said that before I said any of this other stuff. I clearly accept the fact that these were Christians. This is now, okay, so now this is not something that he hasn't watched yet and therefore is ignorant, and he's making this argument because he's ignorant. This is now we're getting into territory where I already said that I know that these are Christians, and he's trying to present it like I think that they're secret atheists. And I believe later on in the video I even say, obviously I'm not saying that they were secret atheists. I say that in the video. And once again, we have to give this guy a chance and see if he goes back and acknowledges the fact that I don't believe that these people are in fact secret atheists. Let's see if he's willing to do that. Guess what the fucking answer is going to be.
Private writings on the matter safely discovered long after his death. Of course, he knew the limitations the Orthodox Christian view imposed upon his speech. He, of all people, knew that it would have been suicide to openly profess atheism in most cultures, yet he attributes the lack of atheist professors to the senselessness and odiousness of atheism?
Okay, so here you see I put some actual examples of scientists who were, burned at the stake. Not for being atheists, but for merely, rejecting the Trinity. Forget about atheism. They just rejected the Trinity and they were burned at the stake. And remember earlier, he said that, we wouldn't have been burned at the stake. Is he going to be silent on this evidence? Like there's evidence staring him in the face right now. What is he going to say about this?
No. Newton obsessed over alchemy and the Bible. And ironically, if he had limited his studies to such, we wouldn't even know his name today. to know the mighty works of...
Okay, so right there, shortly after his point that I implied that Newton was a secret atheist, you can clearly see that I showed how, not showed, but how I acknowledged that the man obsessed over the Bible, right? He was obviously a Christian, but this man is totally, the revisionist here is totally silent about it, right? Like, he just got through making a point that I think Isaac Newton was a secret atheist. And then right after that, I talk about how he obsessed over the Bible. But crickets, fucking crickets.
God, to comprehend his wisdom and majesty and power, to appreciate in degree the wonderful workings of his laws. Surely all this must be a pleasing and acceptable mode of worship to the Most High, to whom ignorance cannot be more gratifying than knowledge. Nicholas Copernicus. If it is the case that God finds knowledge more gratifying than ignorance, then it forces one to wonder why he plagued all of humankind with death, just because the first people ate from the tree of knowledge.
Wow, Dark Matter sounds really, really bitter about that story that he doesn't believe ever happened.
Okay, so now we're back to like basic creationism 101, 2008 argumentation. Oh, you're so passionate about this story that you don't believe in. Like, there's got to be at least 2,000 videos from atheists answering why that is so. All saturating YouTube. It's just tiresome. It would be like if I uploaded another video, refuting Pascal's wager. It's like, okay, the market is saturated. You fucking people don't have an excuse anymore. You've heard the argument. If you haven't heard it, then you're being an idiot. Look at what's out there before you start arguing against it. I don't argue against God and the stories in the Bible and everything like that because I think that God is real. I don't obsess over God because I think God is real. I don't do it because I believe in God. I do it because I believe in his followers. I do it because I believe in the people who call themselves Christians. These people are real and they have an effect on the lives of other people. And part of their motivation comes from these holy books. Do you understand that? So yes, as atheists, you have to go to the source of the inspiration of their actions, right? The things that they do that you don't like. You have to trace that back to a source. And when that source is the Bible, it behooves you to deconstruct those stories. That's why we do it. Not because God exists, but because you exist.
I don't know. I thought that I'd be viewing this and sort of refuting it. And I kind of gave some refutations in the first 5 minutes, but it just feels really sad and dirty. I really feel sorry for Dark Matter 2525. I mean, he sounds like someone who's really undergone some hard things in his life.
So that's a basic ad hominem attack, right? That has nothing to do with my points. Going through hardships. Like, I've been an atheist my entire life. Before I knew what the word atheism meant, when I was single digits in age, I didn't know what an atheist was. The first time I heard the word atheist, I heard my brother ask my dad, "Oh, is grandfather an atheist?" And that scared me. I thought he had some kind of disease, right? But I knew at that point in my life, even when I was that little, that I didn't believe in these fantastical stories that I heard in Sunday school, right? And just stories. And I didn't distinguish them from other fairy tales that I heard. And, the hardships in my life that were brought about, just from, regular circumstances that could face anybody. And those, the thing is a lot of them did not really come from religious people. A lot of the hardships in my life didn't really come from religious people. They didn't. And a lot of the, I really can't complain about my life as it is now, even though I live in the middle of the Bible Belt. I still have managed to eke out a decent living, doing what I do here on YouTube. I know, but I have a lot of friends and a lot of family who have been profoundly negatively impacted by religion. I am motivated to fight against it for those reasons, and also just because of the truth, because I care about the truth. I do care about oppression, certainly. But I do believe oppression would exist with or without religion. A major aspect of it is that I have an extreme care for what is true. And I think that religion gets in the way of our ability to find truth in the world.
I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with sense, reason, and intellect has intended us to forego their use. When I reflect on so many profoundly marvelous things that persons have grasped, sought, and done, I recognize even more clearly that human intelligence is a work of God, and one of the most excellent. Galileo Galilei. Unlike the limited knowledge available to Galileo during the 17th century, we people of the 21st century are privileged to understand quite well how human intelligence evolved naturally. Notice that throughout these quotes, I've included the connections these illustrious scientists had with the aristocracy. This is important to note because there were many peasant uprisings going on all over Europe at that time, making the upper class very nervous. This
is interesting.
Aristocracy supported a more authoritarian church in order to help keep the peasants in check. These scientists were caught between a...
was Dark Matter 2525 expecting the scientists to come from, like, the illiterate peasant class?
No, not at all. Listen to my point. Just close your mouth for a little while and listen to the point I make. It has nothing to do with the possibility that they could have come from, somewhere else. I know there wasn't a lot of social mobility going on back then. Just relax and close your mouth.
How would that even be possible?
Rock in a hard place. Not only did they have to worry about the peasant uprisings, but they had to worry about persecution from the church because of their scientific findings being deemed heretical.
What can I say? Marxist history. I don't know. I'm saying Marxist history. To explain this, if you're just entering it, I'm sure he's not a communist. But this explanation of everything through power dynamics and oppressor and oppressed dynamics, it's straight from dialectic materialism.
Okay, so this is just a basic ad hominem, guilt by association bullshit. You're not actually refuting anything. You're just slapping a label on it and dismissing it. Okay? There's no denying that these scientists faced pressure from both below and above. Like I said, they were caught between a rock and a hard place. Okay? You aren't actually refuting that. But what you are doing is you're poisoning the well. You're saying, oh, look, wait. This guy is just this is cultural Marxism. Okay? That's just an ad hominem.
Realism.
Of course, I'm not saying they were secret atheists, but they had every...
Okay, here we go. I reiterated this. Remember, this isn't me saying this for the first time. This is a reiteration of me saying, of course, I'm not saying they were secret atheists. Let's see if he has the fucking integrity to go back and correct himself. Now's your chance, revisionist. Go ahead.
They had everything to lose and nothing to gain by deviating from the norm and failing to declare that their work was in devotion to God.
So he's kind of saying they were secret atheists. And this is sort of the thing.
Absolutely astounding. Astounding. I'm saying that they had to agree, publicly at least, with the accepted Christian orthodoxy of the day. Look, you couldn't be a different kind of Christian. All right? What? Look at the schism that caused. This isn't about, Christianity or atheism. Those are your two choices. That's not what this, persecution is based on. I know you want to maintain this thing that I'm perpetuating this cultural Marxist, interpretation of history. I know you need me to be that way in order for your straw man to, to exist, but that's not the way I am, and that's not what I'm saying. Accept it.
I'm not saying that you beat your wife. I'm just saying, it's kind of odd how mean you are to her. This is sort of like the classic passive-aggressive way to make an accusation, is to say I'm not making the accusation and then to insinuate it.
In other words, they had no choice but to profusely pander to the church, especially if they wanted to continue their research unmolested.
Notice how I'm very careful with my language. I said they had to pander to the church. That does not necessitate being a secret atheist.
Those scientists
Wasn't Newton a great counterexample of that?
definitely did not have the leeway to deviate.
Okay. Bruno was not burned at the stake for his work on science. He was burned at the stake for promoting witchcraft and promoting mysticism.
Okay, everybody cancel oppression. Oppression didn't occur. This scientist wasn't killed because he was a scientist. He was killed because of some other belief he held. Oppression canceled. All right, everybody, my narrative is over. Science was completely unimpeded by Christianity, even though scientists were burned at the stake. But it's okay because he wasn't burned at the stake because he was a scientist. He was burned at the stake for some other belief. All right, and I write on there, he disbelieved in eternal damnation, the Trinity, the divinity of Jesus, the virginity of Mary, and transubstantiation. Okay, he was burned at the stake, right? Which apparently this guy thinks. If you go back earlier in the video, he says that just did not happen. Oh, what? That didn't happen. But he's not going to remember that or acknowledge it. Of course he's not. The point isn't that he was burned at the stake because he was a scientist. He was a scientist who was burned at the stake, who did go against the accepted Christian orthodoxy at the time. You're not refuting that point, and that's the point that I'm making.
Essentially, the very kind of hucksterism that skeptics are so proud about debunking in the modern world. People who sell snake oil, people who sell false cures. This is ridiculous. The idea that we can take this person and superimpose him as a martyr for science, I don't know.
Look, do you think that I would want to see Deepak Chopra burned at the stake? Do you think that that's something that I would approve of? Don't you think that that's something where if someone left it up to me, Deepak Chopra would live to a ripe old age? Of course. What are you implying here? Are you being a burned at the stake apologist now? I mean, are you saying that it's okay because he was a huckster? Is that what you're implying? I don't approve of people who are pagans or Muslims or Christians, being burned at the stake because of their beliefs that I deem to be incorrect. How about that?
Allow their scientific findings to cast any sort of doubt, at least not publicly. And that is hardly something about which David should be boasting from the comfort of a country that values freedom of religion, one of our most important values, a value that was,
unless you're a cake baker,
violently opposed.
Unless you're a cake baker. What's that supposed to mean? Cake bakers aren't allowed to practice their religion? Is baking cakes integral to Christianity now? Religious freedom doesn't mean that you get to fucking do whatever you want because you think your religion demands it. Religious freedom has its limitations. You can't use your religious freedom to remove my freedoms. You can't use your religious freedom to make impositions upon me. Now, if you disagree with that, why don't we have a conversation about Sharia law?
By Christianity all throughout its history, and certainly opposed by the Bible itself. Note that Galileo, the father of modern science, was censored by the church and held captive under permanent house arrest and threatened with execution for the charge of, and I quote, following the position of Copernicus, which is thought crime. Rest assured that the church finally apologized to Galileo when I was in high school in 1992.
I mean, okay, this is sort of this ridiculous thing where we ask institutions to apologize for things that happened 500 years ago.
Right. Now notice how he's contradicting himself. Like earlier in the video, he was talking about, he was saying that he could be sorry for the things that the Catholic Church did. Go back and listen to it. I don't remember exactly when and where, but if you listen earlier in the video, he was talking about being able to be sorry for the things that your side did, right? You remember that? And now he's doing a complete 180, right? Now he's talking about how ridiculous it is to apologize for things that your side did 500 years ago. And, I would tend to agree with that. I do. I never asked the Pope for an apology. I don't care if the Pope apologizes to Galileo. I'm an atheist. I believe that Galileo is completely gone, non-existent, except for, bones in the ground. That's what I believe Galileo is. He doesn't need an apology, right? It's useless. It's nothingness to me. I don't care. The reason I included this in my video is because I just thought it was funny, hundreds of years later, and, they're saying, okay, maybe the Earth does go around the sun after all. I just find that funny.
We frequently censor people who we think are wrong in our present age. We're currently in the process of doing this. Is the government going to give an apology for this when it discovers it's wrong? No, it's not. This happens all the time. It happened in communist countries. It happened for secular reasons. But the Catholic Church is the one organization that has to systematically apologize.
Okay, so this is just juvenile argumentation. Go into any court of law and say, but that guy committed a murder too.
For malfeasance. I even wonder what the hell is the point of all of these apologies, right? I mean, at the point we are right now, where we're considering going back and apologizing for fighting back against Islamic invasions of Europe. Like, people have talked about how the Poles should apologize for pushing back against the Turkish invasion of their territories. I mean, this is sort of this progressive obsession with going to old institutions and sort of extracting measures of contrition for them. I mean, there's probably some idea here that I could elaborate on and talk about more, but I don't know. I'm just going to get through this video.
359 years after condemning him. Better late than never. But how could Copernicus be so damned? He was the guy at the very beginning of this revolution. David claimed him as a devout Christian, vital to modern science.
Okay, I did not remember that I did this, but I actually did include the example of the self-censorship of René Descartes when he deliberately did not publish his book, The World, because it accepted heliocentrism. So here we have an example right in front. Now, this guy should be looking at the screen right now, hopefully, where it's a direct refutation of something he said earlier, that no, Descartes was totally unaffected by this censorship, right? But no, he was affected by it. Like, now, once again, we have to see if this guy goes back and corrects himself, but I think by now we all know the answer to that.
Science. So how could it possibly be a crime punishable with lifelong incarceration and possibly even death to merely follow the position of Copernicus? David proclaimed that Copernicus's reasons for doing his scientific studies involved his desires to know and comprehend the works of God, and that he believed those studies to be a form of worship. That doesn't sound like a guy the church should be suppressing. David said, and I quote, Sounds like his scientific research was grounded in his religious beliefs.
Okay, so it appears he's not going to acknowledge Rene Descartes. He's not going to acknowledge his mistake or even have an answer for what I say about him. Okay, whatever. We all knew that was going to happen. But here I am laying out arguments that this guy already made. Like, it doesn't sound like this guy is somebody the church should be suppressing, right? But, at this point, we get nothing but deafening silence from this guy.
Wrong. The motive for his research may have been grounded in his religious beliefs, if you believe he wasn't pandering to the church for his very life, but his actual research was grounded in scientific methodology, which is completely absent from Scripture. And
now, this is something that people might not realize, but a lot of the church's opposition to heliocentrism was, in some sense, scientific. And okay, how is that possibly the case, right? As opposed to all the other things I've mentioned, heliocentrism is something that Europe was manifestly behind all the other civilizations. India knew that heliocentrism was the case. China did. And that's because heliocentrism makes your star maps move better. It explains the motion of the stars. It explains the pattern of the seasons a lot better than does geocentrism. There's one thing, though, that heliocentrism does not explain until you get things like Newton. And that is physics. Because we were operating under Aristotle. And Aristotle had this idea of, motion coming to a stop, right? He said, objects in motion naturally come to a stop. And this is the physics of Aristotle. It's totally incorrect before Newton's inertia, right? So if something is moving and you're on the moving object, you fly right off of it, right? Because your nature is to come to a stop and the object is moving. So how do we know that the Earth isn't moving? Well, the mountains don't fly right off of it, right? The seas don't suddenly just go flying off into space. And the view of heliocentrism could not be reconciled with our understanding of how physics worked. And for that reason, it was resisted. But the resistance of adopting heliocentrism for this reason actually resulted in quite good.
Okay, so he's ignoring the verses that I give and also the people on both sides of the Reformation who I mentioned that used religion to oppose heliocentrism. Of course, there was scientific contention, as there always is in science. That's no great revelation there. See, this is another example of the all or nothing type mentality of this simpleton. It's either all got to be, scientific contention, or it's got to be all religious contention. And no, I acknowledge that there was both going on simultaneously. But obviously, because this video is about, the influence, positive and negative, of Christianity, I'm going to focus on the religious aspect of it, right? I'm not required to include the scientific conflict, even though that played a part of it, because that's just a natural part of science. That's how science works itself out. There's conflict, there's peer review, right? It's a battle. You can't say that the scientific process is what held back the science. The scientific process is what causes the science to progress. But when we talk about religious interference, that's an entirely different problem, and we are going to have a different type of problem with it, right? We're going to have different type of arguments against it, and that is the scope of this video. So he's trying to force me into this pigeonhole where I totally ignore all these other things, even though they're not relevant to what's being discussed.
Effect, because once we actually adopted heliocentrism, it called out for an explanation of why the motion, the bodies on Earth move differently than they did in the heavens. And this is the direct impetus for discovering the Newtonian laws of motion. And and China nor India had these advanced concepts of physics, and what led them to adopt heliocentrism much faster. It also made it so they didn't ask the questions they needed to ask. once they actually adopted the theory.
The objectivity of that methodology is utterly immune to anyone's motives. You can use the scientific method to create a nuclear bomb, for instance, or you can use it to create better crops to feed the starving. In other words, the answer is the answer, regardless of why you decided to seek the answer in the first place. Just as telling, however, is the fact that David mentions nothing of Copernicus's most influential detractors, famous theists who derived most of their arguments against Copernicus not from scientific methodology, but from Scripture. They included John Calvin, Martin Luther, Philip Melanchthon, Nicholas Serarius, and Francesco Ingoli.
Okay, so I have to make a retraction. I mistakenly said that I already mentioned these people and I hadn't gotten to them yet, but I do now. I acknowledge that these were his most influential detractors, and they were not based in science, but in religion. So let's hear what he has to say about that, now that I've refuted his earlier point, the point he already made, because he doesn't know how to listen to a video first. Let's see if he acknowledges this.
So let's be clear. Even in the midst of the Protestant Reformation, there were influential Christians on both sides, united in their condemnation of Copernicus.
Oh my God, there was disagreement, guys. That's amazing.
Okay, so now he just totally blows it off, right? The intellectual dishonesty on display here is like, it's mind-blowing. Like he makes a point, my video like swoops in and says, hey, what about this? And then he just laughs and says, ha ha ha, there was disagreement, guys. Hilarious. This is hilarious.
The Catholic Church actively suppressed Copernicus's work, removed and altered passages of it because it was, quote, contrary to Holy Scripture, and they didn't want it to, quote, creep any further to the prejudice of Catholic truth. 400 years later, David Wood comes along on YouTube and says, we have Christianity to thank for Copernicus's discoveries. Yet when we look beyond the surface-level thinking, look beyond the snippet of a quote, and as we actually do the work and delve into the history, what we actually find is a great swath of influential Christians fighting tooth and nail against the very progress that Christians will eventually claim credit for after the truth of the matter becomes apparent. Christianity fights and fights and fights, and when it finally loses, it pretends the fight never took place and then plagiarizes the winner.
Okay, so now this is me accusing people like him of what he was accusing me of. Like this revisionism of history, where you go back and you accept all the good and your people accepted all the good and rejected all the bad. You know, this is exactly what Christianity did. Not Christianity, but what people like David Wood are doing. Like they're saying, oh, all this great stuff happened because of my religion, right? And never mind all this other crap. I'm going to leave all this other bad stuff out of it and leave all this retardation out of it. You know, the way they retarded scientific progress, the way they held back the very scientists which he is claiming as his own, right? I'm gonna ignore all that, and I'm gonna just claim all the good for myself and reject all the bad. Like this is what the revisionist here was accusing me of, and now instead of just a blind accusation and an ad hominem, I actually went through step by step, showing my work, showing how it is that people like David Wood, people like himself, are doing these things. He just accused me. But not, I didn't just accuse. I actually showed my work. Let's see if he has anything to say about it.
That's not bitter. Oh God, I don't know. The critique of this really did not change. I feel like it's kind of coming to an end.
Okay, so when his criticism as actually legitimately turned around against him, his answer is, "That's not bitter. Okay, I guess this is coming to an end." That's it. That's it. You just had your shit turned around right back on you with evidence. And your response is, that's not better. Bravo, sir. Bravo.
Of those scientists reaffirmed Christian truth. They would not have been so thoroughly persecuted from every corner of Christendom. The reason they were persecuted is because the implications of their scientific findings were contrary to Christian belief.
Well, how is that possible when you admitted that the Greeks persecuted atheists too?
What does that have to do with anything? Different forms of oppression exist. You can oppress Christians and you can oppress atheists. Totally different, right? If atheists, let me put it this way. If I were to go into Bangladesh right now and start professing atheism, right? And it wouldn't even fucking matter if I'm a renowned scientist, right? I'm going to get into some serious shit. And it has nothing to do with Christianity. That's Islam, right? So, I mean, it doesn't matter if it were, the Greeks oppressing atheists, or Christians oppressing other Christians who did not adhere to the belief structure the way they wanted them to, right? It's still a retardation of progress. I'm not arguing for, atheists getting the credit, right? This is another example of his all in or all out mentality. Like, because he's arguing that Christians shouldn't get the credit, that means he's arguing that atheists should get the credit. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. Not at all. Jesus Christ, dude.
Good Lord.
At least until the apologists could figure out some mental gymnastics that would make them acceptable, a long-standing Christian tradition. I'm actually glad that they were there to find the loopholes that stopped Christians from suppressing science. In that regard, even we atheists owe those apologists our gratitude. The bulk of Christianity, however, believed that if those new ideas about the universe were accepted and disseminated, it would mean that their religion would lose influence. And they were right, because that...
Oh my God. Well, I mean, not really, because Christianity was really reaching the height of its fervor at the same time of the scientific revolution. People are unaware, but there's oscillations in religiosity, even in the Middle Ages.
Okay. Yeah, who cares? That's not a refutation. I didn't claim that there weren't fluctuations in religiosity. Of course there are. But you can't deny the sharp decline that's going on right now in some areas and not other areas. Now, you see a sharp decline in Christianity in the developed world, where knowledge is more easily disseminated, more freely disseminated, yet more influence being gained by, say, Islam, and even Christianity too in parts of Africa, where knowledge is suppressed. And I think that alone is very telling. When people are free to study what they want to study, religion falters.
There were more secular ages, there were more religiously based ones, and I'm afraid that the 16th century was a highly religious age, and that continued on well into the 19th century. I mean, the advent and discovery of science, it really did not have any noticeable effect on religion until the 19th century, until industrialization.
That is exactly what happened. Their fears were justified. The truth will out. Their brutal dominance was righteously sacrificed for a better, more prosperous, less authoritarian world. We need to do everything we can to maintain that
unless you happen to live under communism. In that case, secularism did not lead to a less authoritarian world.
direction.
This whole response video is in regard to Christianity's effect on Western civilization. That's the context of this argument, right? I don't own communism. I'm not a communist, right? I don't agree with the things they did. The authoritarian regimes of communism. I don't agree with the things they did, all right? I don't believe in oppressing religious people. I don't believe in forcibly stopping people from practicing their religion who aren't at least using their religion as an oppressive imposition on other people. As long as you're minding your own business and you're not hurting anyone, you should be able to practice your fucking religion. So don't put that on me. Don't even imply it. I don't agree with it. Now, I realize you might not be doing that, but in putting the blame on secularism, you're sort of ignoring the fact that the reason religion was oppressed in communist countries is not because they wanted to promote secularism for secularism's sake. It's because they saw it as competition. You know, they wanted people to not turn to religion, but turn to the government. They wanted people to be reliant on the government. And religion got in the way of that. And I don't agree with that.
A surefire way to ruin our wonderful progress would be to indulge in a misguided Christian revival to combat Islam. Secularism is the answer to Islam. Both Christianity and Islam are ancient Middle Eastern Abrahamic religions. No matter how different they may seem to you, their DNA is identical, and their histories are both brutally oppressive. Either one is more than capable of throwing us all into limbo for 1,000 years. So let's not play with fire and figure out an intelligent and peaceful way to deal with Islam while preserving the freedoms and rights we have and striving to gain them for those who do not.
So, oh, good Lord, where do you end with this video? I mean, it's wishful thinking. It didn't provide any answers. I kind of knew that on the outset.
Yeah, this is more of that fast food mentality. You know, give me the answers. Give me. You know, these are extremely difficult questions that have plagued the minds of geniuses. And I'm supposed to provide a solution, you know, in my fucking YouTube video. You know, it would be arrogant of me to think that I could. I'm not that pretentious. I'm sorry.
What people mean when they mean is Christianity an answer to Islam? I really don't think that people are going to adopt Christianity and Islam's going to magically go away. I think that anyone who looks out into the world today, or anyone who looks at demographic statistics, understands that Islam is a growing civilizational and demographic force in the world. They have had technology, they have had science for 200 years now. It hasn't put a dent in their belief in any number of doctrines that we hold, their doctrine of expansion. So the West is either going to have to...
Right. Islam is rising, and Christianity has existed and enjoyed tremendous power all throughout Islam's rise, right? So that should be one thing right there that should be quite apparent evidence that Christianity has failed to be a check against Islam. It failed, okay? Now, I do have to admit that Islam seems to be gaining a foothold in the most secular, most peaceful countries on the face of the planet right now, and that is disconcerting. It's also disappointing that people just want to dismiss all opposition to that as racism. I have a problem with Islam, and that problem has to deal with the religion itself and not the race of the people who believe in it. It just so happens that most of the people who are Muslim are not white people. So it's very easy to be, and in a lot of cases this is true too. It's easy to link it to racism. It's easy to say, oh, look at this white guy who has a problem with, you know, the brown people. You know, and a lot of white people don't make it easy on people like myself when their criticism, their so-called quote unquote criticism of Islam is rooted in the racial. And they do make, you know, these racist caricatures, you know, of Muslims. And that is a great disservice to actual intelligent critiques of Islam, where you actually go into the dogma and break it down step by step and try to refute it. the response to Islam shouldn't be based in skin color, but it should be based in scripture.
Get over itself. It's going to have to get some understanding of metaphysics, get some understanding of objective justice. It's going to have to start believing in itself again, or it's just going to be subsumed under an expansionistic Islamic world. Demographically, if not otherwise. I mean, people like Dark Matter 2525, they're more concerned about being on the right side of history than they are actually in stopping this bad future from coming about.
Isn't that tautological? I mean, aren't you inherently on the right side of history if you stopped this bad future from coming about? What? That's meaningless. You agree. You don't want to be on the wrong side of history either.
I honestly wonder what he thinks. Does he think that we're just going to go back to 1995 if we get rid of? I mean, what religion is he even speaking of right now? Europe is largely secular. Is that safety against Islam? In some sense, it's actually the only countries in Europe that have really pushed back at all about on the current immigration waves have been, well, Poland, which is the most religious European country we have. I mean, this is
that isn't so much about the religion, though. You know, a lot of that has to do with what do you want to call, whether you want to call them refugees or migrants, whatever. You know, that's something that goes on everywhere. Like the United States. You know, you have conservatives who are very much against Mexicans coming in, right? That doesn't have a religious component to it. You know, Mexicans tend to be Catholic. They're the correct religion. So it doesn't have anything to do with that. A lot of this is about immigration, not necessarily about the religion itself, but immigration, especially immigration of, let's face it, people who are not white. And there's people who are concerned about preserving so-called white culture. Again, this has nothing to do with religion. My problem is with the religion.
This is not a reason to believe in religion. It's not a reason. You know, I definitely do believe that religion is a bulwark against much of sort of the civilizational decline that's leading to Islam.
Well, you notice how he pinned communism on secularism, right? And there's a lot of people who think that Christianity is a bulwark against communism, for instance. But, you know, look at what happened in Venezuela. Venezuela is 88% Christian, and they went totally socialist. You know, what's his answer to that? You know, we actually have real world examples of Christianity failing to be the bulwark that people claim that it is. You know, Christianity existed for 1,500 years alongside Islam, and it failed to prevent the spread of Islam. How many years is it going to take for you to finally learn the fucking lesson? Or are you just going to point to Poland and say, well, see? No, I mean, this stuff has been going on for centuries.
Islamic expansion in Europe, but it's not an argument for believing it, but it's an argument for sociologically understanding what occurred and not engaging in this ahistorical method where we superimpose our Western notions of rights and freedom onto a medieval world that never, those ideas could never even have been implemented in that world.
Okay, so this is again him accusing me of the very thing that he does. He's looking back on history and saying, this was because of my people, right? And he's projecting that onto me and saying that I'm looking back on history and saying that it's because of my people. I don't do that. I am against oppression when it happens to Christians, and I'm against it when it happens to atheists. And I can recognize that both can happen simultaneously. And incidentally, that belief of mine is antithetical to cultural Marxism. So there's always that too.
So, I don't know. 40 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. There you go.
Okay, so it looks like he's finally done bloviating, and he didn't absorb any of my arguments. He just decided beforehand that he was going to be against this. And even when he totally agreed with me, he tried to, paint it from an angle that, he was still against it. And even when he didn't realize that I was arguing against a fellow Christian, he took the arguments of his fellow Christian and assumed that they were, in fact, my position, which is laughable, obviously. And of course, there were several instances where he made points before I made them, as a rebuttal to me. But then when I actually made those same points, he, of course, failed for whatever reason to go back and correct himself and be intellectually honest. So this is just him, providing red meat for his audience, I guess. I see no intellectual honesty here whatsoever. This is a very lazy person, and I'm sorry this went on so long, but I just felt like it had to be out there in the world.